Chapter 26-22. Chapter 26-22. Chapter 26-22, A Battle of Life and Death. When Yeton heard Lung Sanshin's words, he couldn't help but frown, and at the same time, his heart sank. He could tell that Lung Sanshin was trapped in the saint's inheritance. So this saint's inheritance was a trap. At this moment, Fat Cat's voice rang out and said solemnly, "There's actually a powerful seal in the inheritance." Niet Tion was slightly taken aback and frowned. Fat Cat saw through Niet Tion's doubts and explained, "This evil emperor must have wanted to fuse with the saint's inheritance. But who knew that there was a seal in the saint's inheritance that directly swallowed his body, leaving only a remnant soul, which was imprisoned in the inheritance?" So that's how it is. Niet Tion's eyes narrowed, and he understood. Fat Cat's guess was right. Lung Sanshin's body was indeed swallowed by the seal in the inheritance. 100,000 years ago, when the Ghost Emperor's tomb opened, Lung Sanshin entered the tomb in order to find the legendary saint's inheritance. He had painstakingly found the saint's inheritance in front of him, but when he was fusing with it, his body was swallowed by the seal in the inheritance, leaving only a remnant soul to live on in this world. The dignified, evil emperor had fallen to such a state, it could only be said that evil had its retribution. At this time, Lung Sanshin was considering whose body he should occupy. As long as he could seize Niet Tion's, or Feng Qi's body, he would be able to break through the seal and be reborn. For the past 100,000 years, he had been fighting against the seal every day and had already exhausted the seal. It was just that he needed a suitable body to be reborn in. Kid from the Feng family. After a while, Lung Sanshin's gaze locked onto Feng Qi. It was obvious that he had taken a fancy to the latter's martial body. He smiled coldly and said, "You really want to take revenge for Feng Yi, right? This emperor will give you a chance to take revenge today. How about it?" Feng Qi's gaze suddenly trembled, blazing with incomparable passion. Niet Tion, however, frowned and became more cautious. Actually, although Niet Tion and Feng Qi were controlled by Lung Sanshin, the current situation wasn't that bad. After all, Lung Sanshin was just a remnant soul. He did not have any power, so he could only rely on the power of inheritance. He was activating the power of inheritance, which was why he released the pressure of the saint energy. Lung Sanshin had used up a great deal of his mental strength just now. At this moment, it was impossible for him to release a second attack. Therefore, he couldn't do anything to Niet Tion and Feng Qi. As long as Niet Tion and Feng Qi could hold on for a little longer, they would be able to escape when Lung Sanshin's spirit power was almost used up. "Niet Tion, don't be nervous. This guy is just a remnant soul. He doesn't have the ability to kill you." Fat Cat saw this and reminded Niet Tion. Niet Tion nodded slightly, and his expression relaxed a lot. He wanted to know what other tricks Lung Sanshin had up his sleeves. "Lung Sanshin, what do you want? Just say it." Feng Qi said coldly, and his eyes were filled with killing intent. "Young man from the Feng clan, I know you're not convinced." Lung Sanshin's eyes quivered, and he said, "I'm willing to give you a fair fight. If you enter the inheritance, I'll have a soul fight with you. Are you willing?" Niet Tion heard what Lung Sanshin said, and he shouted, "Lung Sanshin, you're so despicable. You let Feng Qi enter the inheritance because you want to devour his soul." How could Niet Tion not know that Lung Sanshin was harboring evil intentions? The so-called soul fight was actually Lung Sanshin devouring Feng Qi's soul. Of course, if Feng Qi's soul was strong enough, he could also devour Lung Sanshin's soul. Back then, Niet Tion had almost devoured Sakura Heaven's discarnate soul. But Feng Qi was so young, so his soul must not be strong. As for Lung Sanshin, he was an old monster who had lived for hundreds of thousands of years. Even if he was just a remnant soul, he was still unimaginably terrifying. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to survive in the inheritance for so long. "Young man, I'm giving him a chance to make a choice." Lung Sanshin looked at Niet Tion and said coldly, "Do you think it's possible for you to leave this place alive? Don't bluff." Niet Tion laughed and said, "You're just a remnant soul, and you have no power at all. The attack just now has already weakened him. Right now, all you can do is trap us. We'll be able to leave when you're a little weaker. Bastard you. Lung Sanshin's eyes quivered, and he was speechless. He obviously didn't expect that Nie Tian could see through all of this. He indeed didn't have the ability to kill Nie Tian and Feng Qi otherwise. He wouldn't have bothered to talk nonsense. Feng Qi, all we need to do is wait patiently and leave. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said to Feng Qi, just leave him here and let him continue to live a life worse than death. Lung Sanshin's eyes froze when he heard Nie Tian's words. He had been trapped for hundreds of thousands of years, and Feng Qi was his only chance. If Feng Qi left, he would have to wait for at least another 100,000 years. But his remnant soul was very weak now, and it was impossible for him to hold on for another 100,000 years. Feng Qi's eyes were fixed, and his face was gloomy. He didn't speak for a long time. Young man from the Feng clan, this is a good chance for you to take revenge. Do you really want to give up? Lung Sanshin looked at Feng Qi and said earnestly, Feng Qi, don't listen to him. Nie Tianling sneered and said in a low voice, all right. But the next moment, Feng Qi suddenly raised his head and stared at Lung Sanshin fiercely. He said word by word, I will fight with you. Huh? Nie Tian's face froze, and he looked at Feng Qi in disbelief. He didn't expect Feng Qi to make such a decision. How could his soul fight with Lung Sanshin? Isn't that courting death? But at this moment, Feng Qi's eyes were extremely determined. He said, Lung Sanshin, I want you to know that the people of the Feng clan will never lose to you. All right. Lung Sanshin was stunned for a moment, and it took him a long time to react. He said with his eyes beaming, then let me see how powerful the people of the Feng clan are. As you wish. Feng Qi roared, and his eyes were extremely determined. All right. Lung Sanshin sneered. Then, the pressure of the same power on Feng Qi disappeared. Feng Qi's body moved, and he flew towards the spear shadow. Feng Qi, Nie Tian exclaimed, but he couldn't stop it because he was controlled by the saint power. Nie Tian, trust me. Feng Qi was in midair, and he turned around to look at Nie Tian. Then, he moved and entered the spear shadow. Ha! Boy of the Feng clan, your martial body is mine now. Lung Sanshin let out a piercing laugh. Then, he moved and entered the spear shadow, and entered Feng Qi's divine sense. Instantly, Nie Tian felt that the invisible force in the void around him disappeared, and he regained his freedom. Oh no! Looking at Feng Qi in midair, Nie Tian frowned, and his face turned pale. But now, he had no choice but to stand aside and watch. At this moment, there were two souls in Feng Qi's body. One was himself, and the other was Lung Sanshin. Two souls, a battle of life and death. Whoever wins, this martial body will belong to that person. Chapter 26-23. Chapter 26-23. Chapter 26-23. Two souls, When Yetan heard Little Fat Cat's words, he couldn't help but frown and ask, Little Fat, what did you discover? Nie Tian couldn't understand the decision that Feng Qi made previously. But now that he thought about it, Feng Qi was very calm just now. It didn't seem like he was acting on impulse. It seemed like he was very confident that he could defeat Lung Sanshin. Feng Qi wasn't an arrogant fool. He was a very smart person. There must be a reason for his decision. This feeling is very strange. I can't quite grasp it. Fat Cat hesitated and frowned. Nie Tian frowned and felt even more strange. Fat Cat couldn't be sure what he found. With Fat Cat's knowledge, there were very few things that he couldn't be sure about. Nie Tian, I have a feeling that Kid Feng's soul is very strange. It's as if there are two souls living in his body. At this moment, the little Fat Cat finally spoke up, its expression extremely strange. What do you mean? Nie Tian was stunned. There are indeed two souls in Feng Qi's body now. One is himself, and the other is Lung Sanshin. No. Fat Cat shook his head and said, I feel that there are two souls in Feng Qi's body. It's just that one is the main soul and the other is the assistant soul. They seem to have merged together. This Tian heard little Fat Cat's words and was stunned for a moment. That's impossible, right? Fat Cat shook his head and said, I'm not sure either. Let's continue to observe. Tian nodded and looked at Feng Qi with a burning gaze. He couldn't do anything about it now. He could only rely on Feng Qi himself. Feng Qi sat quietly in the middle of the spear shadows. He looked very calm on the surface, but inside his divine sense, he was carrying out the most intense confrontation. A moment later, Feng Qi frowned. His face contorted into a sinister expression as if he was in great pain. His entire body was drenched in cold sweat. Feng Qi, you must win. Tian prayed in his heart as he watched from the side. He couldn't do anything now. He didn't know what was happening in Feng Qi's body, so he could only watch. At this moment, Feng Qi suddenly let out a miserable howl, as if he was in great pain. Tian's eyes narrowed, and his heart rose to his throat. However, Feng Qi slowly regained his composure. His expression became natural, and the cold sweat on his body dispersed. He sat there cross-legged, as if he was cultivating. The winner has been decided. The Fat Cat exclaimed in excitement. Tian's eyes flickered as he stared at Feng Qi, didn't even dare to breathe too loudly. He couldn't tell if the current Feng Qi was Feng Qi or Lung Sanxin. However, Feng Qi didn't wake up immediately. He sat there quietly and slowly absorbed the power of inheritance. Seeing this, Tian's face darkened, and he cried out inwardly, "Oh no!" He knew that Feng Qi didn't want to merge with the power of inheritance. But now, Feng Qi was merging with the power of inheritance. Did this mean that the current Feng Qi was no longer Feng Qi, but Lung Sanxin? Not necessarily. The Fat Cat's voice was heard once again. The seal in the inheritance has almost been consumed by the evil emperor. Right now, the inheritance is just a pure power. It's normal for Kid Feng to absorb this force to improve his strength. Tian nodded slightly. He hoped that what the Fat Cat said was true. About half an hour later, the power of inheritance around Feng Qi was completely absorbed. At this moment, Feng Qi opened his eyes and stood up. He was like a spear that pierced through the heavens, sharp beyond compare. Gulp. Tian gulped and stared at Feng Qi. He could sense that the latter's aura was much stronger than before. It seemed that he had reached the half-peak of the martial arts realm. Moreover, the spear intent around Feng Qi's body was also very powerful. Threads of it flowed endlessly. Feng Qi. Tian took a step forward and called out to Feng Qi. He wasn't sure if the person in front of him was Feng Qi or Lung Sanxin. Feng Qi smiled faintly. He looked at Tian and said, Tian, I won. Tian's eyes flickered as he sensed the familiar look in her eyes, and his heart finally relaxed. The person in front of him was not Lung Sanxin, but Feng Qi. Then, Feng Qi moved and landed next to Tian. Tian felt the aura of Feng Qi and was extremely shocked. Feng Qi's martial arts strength had reached the half-peak of the martial arts realm, and his spear art had reached the legendary realm of combining spear and martial arts. Tian estimated that Feng Qi's combat strength was no weaker than a martial artist at the peak of the immortal state. After absorbing the power of inheritance, Feng Qi had almost a qualitative improvement. I can't believe you really won. Tian looked at Feng Qi and couldn't help but shake his head in amazement. Feng Qi's improvement was within his expectations, but he was really curious how Feng Qi defeated Lung Sanxin. Lung Sanxin was an old monster who had lived for hundreds of thousands of years. I was just lucky. Feng Qi smiled faintly and didn't say much. Instead, he said in his heart, Tian, this secret of mine can only be known by myself. I really can't tell you. I'm sorry. In fact, Feng Qi always had a secret in his heart. This secret was only known by himself, and he would never tell anyone in his life. Fat Cat's guess was right. There were indeed two souls in Feng Qi's body, and the two souls were perfectly integrated. One of them, Feng Qi, was from the myriad realms, and the other, Feng Qi, was a soul from another world. The power of the two souls helped Feng Qi defeat Lung Sanxin. This was his biggest secret. Lung Sanqin poisoned Feng Qi's grandfather in order to become the first spear shooter. But now, he had been defeated by Feng Qi and completely disappeared from this world. This could be considered as repaying the debt of gratitude and karma. After a while, Nie Tian became cold. He was really happy for Feng Qi. He knew that Feng Qi must be hiding a secret, but it didn't affect their friendship. Nie Tian also had a bunch of secrets that only he knew. Nie Tian, let's go to the Hanya Valley now. At this moment, Feng Qi looked at Nie Tian and said with a faint smile. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, and then he immediately understood. Feng Qi had devoured Lung Sanqin's soul and inherited a part of the latter's memory. Lung Sanqin was someone who had explored the Ghost Emperor's tomb, so he was very familiar with everything there. The Hanya Valley that Feng Qi mentioned was a cold valley. There were many sages' inheritances there, and it was the place where most martial artists gathered after entering the Ghost Emperor's tomb. Nie Tian was currently looking for Jun Aoqing, but he didn't have any clues. Going to the Hanya Valley with Feng Qi might be a good choice. He might be able to find Jun Aoqing there. Then, the two of them didn't delay any further and headed straight for the Hanya Valley. They didn't stop along the way. Half an hour later, Nie Tian and Feng Qi arrived at the edge of a long and narrow valley, which was none other than the Frostfang Valley. The two of them didn't hesitate and prepared to enter the valley. Bang! But at this moment, a terrifying muffled sound rang out from afar, as if two forces had collided. Someone is fighting. Nie Tian and Feng Qi looked at each other, and then looked up at the sky at the same time. High up in the sky, two figures were standing, both releasing a violent aura. Let's go take a look. Nie Tian had a feeling that the two figures were somewhat familiar. With these words, he leapt into the air and flew towards them. In the blink of an eye, he was tens of thousands of meters away from the two figures, and he could finally see their faces clearly. At this moment, Nie Tian was stunned. He was very familiar with one of the two faces. It was Yin Tianyi. The other face was even more familiar. It was him. Chapter 26-24. A terrifying battle. Nie Tian looked at the two figures in the sky and couldn't react for a long time. Nie Tian, that person is you. Feng Qi was also stunned for a long time before he finally opened his mouth. His voice was trembling, and his face was full of disbelief. Yeah. Nie Tian nodded, the corners of his mouth curling up as a strange light shone in his eyes. Of course, he knew that the person fighting with Yin Tianyi was his mirror image created by the door of the Ghost Emperor. He really wanted to know how strong his mirror image was. At this time, the battle in the sky was very intense. Yin Tianyi, you are dead. Nie Tian's mirror image laughed coldly, his eyes flickering with a cold light. His eyes were so dark and evil that they made people shudder with fear. Nie Tian, do you have the ability to kill me? Yin Tianyi didn't seem to know that the Nie Tian in front of him was fake. He sneered cold and was full of battle intent. Oomph! Nie Tian's mirror image laughed grimly as he took a step forward. Sword intent burst forth from his entire body, causing the void behind him to tremble violently, as if the entire heaven and earth were shaking along with it. This guy has such a terrifying aura. Nie Tian looked from afar and felt the aura of the mirror image Nie Tian. He couldn't help but be shocked. He felt that the aura of the mirror image Nie Tian seemed to be more terrifying than his real body. Maybe it was because the mirror image Nie Tian was created by the door of the Ghost Emperor. His aura could perfectly fit with the surrounding space. It was as if the surrounding force of heaven and earth was integrated into his sword aura. It was extremely terrifying. This mirror image seems to be stronger than you. Feng Qi was also shocked and said, Yin Tianyi felt the aura of the mirror image of Nie Tian, and his eyes narrowed. He couldn't hide his surprise, but then he smiled and said, Nie Tian, I didn't expect your strength to improve so much in just a few days. He clearly did not expect that the aura of the mirror image Nie Tian would actually be so terrifying. Die! The mirror image Nie Tian didn't waste any words and directly attacked. The starry heaven slashed down furiously. The sword light was like a waterfall blooming with light, falling from the sky and killing towards Entieni. When Entieni saw the situation, he did not dare to be careless. The wind and fire, 9 opposing forces in his hand, pierced out. The terrifying sword intent was like a raging wave whizzing out. He was a wind and fire dual elemental swordsman. In his sword intent, there was not only the fierceness of fire, but also the swiftness of wind. The sword essence in the void instantly condensed into a flaming sword shadow. It was like a burning tornado, roaring. Boom! In the next moment, the two sword shadows collided with a loud bang in the sky. Waves of terrifying power spread and wreaked havoc in the space. The mirror images of Nietion and Entieni were directly drowned by the violent sword intent, vanishing from sight. Nietion and Fengqi watched by the side, their expressions extremely shocked. Nietion didn't expect that his own mirror image was actually so terrifying. After a long time, the violent sword intent waves dissipated. The figures of the mirror images, Nietion and Entieni, appeared, standing in the void. The aura of the two people was still violent, and they were not injured. Entieni's gaze was heavy, feeling very strange in his heart. He could feel that Nietion's strength seemed to have increased a lot compared to 10 days ago. In a head-on clash, he actually could not gain the upper hand at all. This was very strange, making Entieni unable to figure it out. Just over 10 days, how could Nietion's strength possibly improve so quickly? Could it be that this guy obtained the inheritance of a saint after entering the Ghost Emperor remains? Entieni's brows furrowed, secretly guessing in his heart. He could only think of this reason for Nietion's strength to improve so quickly in a short time. Entieni, you're dead for sure today. The mirror image, Nietion smiled coldly, his expression extremely sinister. It seemed like the mirror image Nietion not only obtained all of Nietion's strength, but also greatly magnified the dark and sinister side in Nietion's personality. Arrogant. Entieni was thoroughly enraged. With a low roar, the Windfire 9 defiances attacked once more, slashing over wildly towards the mirror image Nietion. High up in the sky, two figures were locked in a fierce battle. The two people's figures could no longer be seen in the sky. There was only a terrifying sword intent wreaking havoc crazily. The sword shadows were like sharp blades, roaring and roaring. When Nietion and Fengqi saw this scene, their hearts were incomparably shocked. The mirror image Nietion and Entieni were both very powerful. Under the clash of strength, they were actually evenly matched. Nietion thought to himself that if he were to encounter his own mirror image, he might be at a disadvantage. In a moment, the mirror image Nietion and Entieni exchanged dozens of swords. The surrounding tens of thousands of meters of space was filled with sword intent, incomparably violent. He's exhausting Entieni's strength. At this time, Nietion suddenly thought of something. His gaze trembled slightly as he said solemnly, "What?" Fengqi was stunned for a moment, not quite understanding what Nietion meant. In the Ghost Emperor's tomb, these mirror images can directly absorb energy from space. Nietion frowned and said solemnly, "That mirror image is exhausting Entieni's strength bit by bit, then waiting for an opportunity to defeat him with one sword." This, Fengqi was stunned and did not know what to say. Who would have thought that a mirror image would actually be so scheming? When Nietion was battling with Huang Fuhong's mirror image previously, the latter had once directly absorbed energy from space with strange means. Bam! At this time, the mirror image Nietion and Entieni exchanged swords again, then the two figures separated and stabilized themselves. Nietion, I have to admit that you have indeed become stronger. Entieni's gaze was gloomy as he said cold, but it's a pity that your opponent is me. So today, there's only one path in front of you, and that is death. After finishing his words, Entieni's entire aura surged violently. Surges of sword intent were extremely violent, making him look extremely ruthless. Entieni has activated the sword vein in his body. Tian saw this scene from afar. His gaze trembled, and he almost screamed. Tian's aura at this time was much stronger than before. It was obvious that he had activated the 9 sword vein. Tian, your mirror image is about to be finished. Feng Qi's gaze also trembled as he said in horror. He had personally experienced the 9 sword vein before, of course. He knew how terrifying its power was. He estimated that Tian's mirror image would not be able to contend against Tian's 9 sword light. Tian's eyes were burning at this time, but he did not speak. But in his heart, he had a different view. Tian's own mirror image, he knew best how strong it was. He even felt that the mirror image's strength was even greater than his own. So, the true strength of Tian's mirror image had yet to be revealed. A mere inborn sword vein. And you want to kill me? The mirror image Tian stood in the void, feeling Tian's sword aura, but there was no fear in his eyes. Instead, it was very cold and even disdainful. The next moment, his body trembled, and the surrounding sword intent surged out. Then a strange scene happened. Violent energy surged out from the void continuously and surged into the mirror image Tian's body. Chapter 26-25. Tamadai Dam. Why is your mirror image so strong? From afar, Feng Qi sensed the powerful aura of sword intent rushing towards him. His eyes trembled involuntarily, his face filled with shock. Tian furrowed his eyebrows and stared at his own mirror image, his eyes shining brightly. He knew that mirror image Tian could increase his strength by absorbing the energy in the space. But he didn't expect it to be this huge. Tian also felt how terrifying mirror image Tian was. He narrowed his eyes, and there was a tinge of fear in them. But at this point, he had no way out. He could only fight with his life on the line. 9 sword vein soared against the sky. In the next moment, Tian let out a low roar. The violent sword intent in his body moved in an instant, after which the space around him trembled as his sword intent condensed together. It was like a fire dragon that rushed down. Suddenly, the void was filled with violent flames. It was as if the entire world had turned into a sea of fire. At the same time, mirror image Tian moved as well. The starry heaven slashed across the void, and a blinding sword radiance bloomed. Then, the shadow of the sword appeared. It was as huge as a mountain and oppressed the void. It was terrifying. At this moment, Tian frowned, and his expression was one of extreme shock. Of course, he could tell that mirror image Tian was using the second form of 3 opposing heavens, Earth, Sword, and Gulf. And the sword aura that mirror image Tian was using was the sword aura of the celestial demon. In other words, mirror image Tian not only inherited Tian's sword technique, but also the celestial demon embryo. The door of the Ghost Emperor was too scary. It could replicate anything. Boom, boom. At this moment, the 2 huge shadows in the void were like 2 moving mountains. They clashed madly. Kaboom. In the next moment, the 2 sword shadows finally collided with each other like raging dragons. The void shook violently, as if everything had come to a standstill for a moment. Boom, boom, boom. In the next instant, boundless power spread out in all directions. The violent force slammed into the void, and even the world seemed to be trembling. Tian and Feng Qi were tens of thousands of meters away. Sensing the terrifying impact, their expressions changed again and again. Chi, chi, chi. High up in the sky, ear-piercing noises continuously rang out, as if the world was about to be destroyed. Bang, bang. A moment later, 2 muffled sounds rang out, and 2 figures flew out, leaving bloody trails in the air. Tian and Feng Qi took a closer look. Those 2 figures were the mirror images of Tian and Tian. 2 blood-colored figures were sent flying thousands of meters away before they managed to stabilize themselves. The mirror image of Tian was drenched in blood. It was obvious that he was heavily injured, but his eyes were cold and bloodthirsty, filled with killing intent. On the other hand, Tiany's injuries were even more serious. His body was badly mutilated, and blood gushed out incessantly. Tian and Feng Qi saw this scene, and their eyes trembled uncontrollably. Neither of them expected that this battle would be so tragic. In particular, the combat power shown by the mirror image of Tian was shocking. Feng Qi originally thought that after Tiany opened the 9 sword vein, mirror image Tian would not be able to resist. But he never thought that mirror image Tian not only withstood the attack of the 9 sword vein, but also seriously injured Tiany. Tiany, your time is up. At this time, mirror image Tian roared. His body shook, and the blood stains on his body were washed away. His aura actually recovered a lot. He was the mirror image of Tian. Not only did he inherit Tian's combat power, but he also inherited Tian's martial body. The clash of swords just now had caused him great harm, but he could directly absorb energy from the space, so he could recover instantly. On the other hand, Tiany was in a very sorry state. His body trembled slightly, as if he was already an arrow at the end of its flight. How is this possible? How can your strength be so strong? Tiany's eyes trembled, and he looked at mirror image Tian's eyes with unconcealable fear and dread. He never dreamed that the outcome of this battle would be like this. Humph! Mirror image Tian Lung laughed twice and said solemnly, "Things that you can't understand, then leave it for after you die to think about it." Finishing, his figure moved, and he directly rushed towards Tiany. But at this time, the void suddenly trembled, and then an unexpected figure appeared. Mirror image Tian's figure paused, and he turned around to look at the figure that suddenly appeared, and his face suddenly darkened. Tiany was stunned at first, and then he looked at the figure, and he was directly stunned on the spot. That figure that suddenly appeared was actually himself. Tiany was petrified on the spot, unable to say a word for a long time. He even suspected that his eyes saw wrongly, or that he had fallen into some kind of illusion. But everything in front of his eyes was so real. Tiany's mirror image. Tian saw the scene above the sky far away, and his eyes involuntarily focused, and he exclaimed in his heart. Of course, he knew that the Tiany that appeared at this moment was Tiany's mirror image. It was just that he did not know how this mirror image's strength compared to Tiany's original body. And when mirror image Tian and mirror image Tiany met, what exactly would happen? Are you going to intervene? At this time, mirror image Tian looked at mirror image Tiany and spoke coldly. "I'm here to save you." Mirror image Tiany smiled strangely, and then looked at Tiany and said, "His strength is not just this little." Tiany was stunned for a moment and forced himself to calm down. Looking at mirror imaging Tiany, he asked, "You? Who exactly are you? Who am I?" Mirror image Tiany laughed, and then his figure moved, and he landed and said, "I am you." "Impossible!" Tiany roared, and his entire person was about to go crazy. Tiany, your true strength is not just this little, right? Mirror image Tiany laughed again and said, "Even at this time, you still want to hide your strength." "You." Tiany was stunned for a moment, and his eyes trembled. He was extremely shocked, and he shouted, "How do you know?" "I already said, I am you." Mirror image Tiany smiled faintly and said, "How can I not know about my own matters?" Tiany's face froze, and he could not say a word for a long time. He did not expect that the person in front of him, who had the same appearance and aura as him, could actually see that he was hiding his strength. Tian and Feng Qi looked at the scene from afar, and they were stunned at the same time. They looked at each other, and they were extremely shocked. Tiany actually hid his strength, and this was something that Tian and Feng Qi could never have imagined. "He has already been defeated by me. What strength does he still have?" At this time, mirror image Tian let out a low roar and said coldly, "Don't be anxious." Mirror imaging Tiany's lips curled into an evil smile, and he stared at Tiany and said faintly, "Tiany, you are about to die. why don't you release the power of the selfless sword seal?" Intieni's eyes trembled, and his expression was extremely shocked. Chapter 26:26. Chapter 266. Chapter 266. Selfless sword seal. Intieni stood rooted to the ground for a few seconds. His eyes slowly turned from surprise to ruthlessness and killing intent. The mirror image Niet Tian noticed that Intieni's expression was strange. He frowned and said in his heart, "Did this guy really hide his strength? Since you know, then I won't hide it anymore." At this moment, Intieni suddenly let out a furious roar. His body shuddered violently, and a tremendous aura burst into the sky. The bloodstains on his body disappeared instantly, and a terrifying murderous intent was emitted from his body. His aura actually increased by a few times in an instant. Boom, boom, boom. Intieni's body constantly released a terrible power. It was as if in his body, a wild beast that had been sleeping for a long time suddenly woke up. He really hid his strength. The mirror image Niet Tian saw this, and his figure moved slightly. Then he retreated 1,000 meters away. He looked at Intieni with a face of surprise. Intieni's aura, compared to just now, not only did it not weaken, but it became several times stronger. It was very scary. He really couldn't understand why Intieni, who was already seriously injured, could still burst out such a terrible aura. Selfless sword seal finally opened. The mirror image Intieni was very calm. He smiled faintly and said, "Intieni, your teacher is really good to you. He is willing to share such a terrible power with you. It's a pity that this is not your power after all. I can't inherit it." Intieni's aura rose wildly. His long hair flew in the air. He seemed to be crazy and extremely scary. The power he was using now came from a seal in his body, selfless sword seal. And this seal was left in his body by his teacher, selfless sword demon Qin Xiuhan. Qin Xiuhan warned Intieni that he must not use the selfless sword seal unless it was a life-and-death moment. The power of the selfless sword seal was too strong. Even if it was just the power of sword seal, it was enough to make Intieni's strength have a qualitative leap. It was because the selfless sword seal was too strong. Once Intieni used it, he would be in a very weak state for a few days. In fact, just now, Intieni had been thinking about whether to use the selfless sword seal. The sudden appearance of mirror image Intieni forced him to use it. Because the selfless sword seal was not Intieni's own power, the mirror image Intieni did not inherit the power of the sword seal. Turns out that there's still such a terrifying power in this fellow's body. Niet Tian looked at Intieni from afar, and his gaze involuntarily trembled as he exclaimed at his heart. He could also tell that the power that Intieni released did not belong to him, but came from someone else. Qin Xiuhan was truly despicable. He had Intieni fight on his behalf, and he even left such a powerful energy in Intieni's body. Fortunately, when Intieni was fighting with Feng Qi, he did not use the selfless sword seal. Otherwise, Feng Qi would definitely be dead. "You forced me to do this." At this moment, Intieni let out a wild roar. His entire person was like a wild beast. His eyes swept across the mirror image Nitan and mirror image Intieni, and he said coldly, "Today, both of you will die." As his violent voice fell, Intieni took a step forward, and the wind and fire 9 inverse swords slashed down. Boom! Suddenly, the void shook violently, and an incomparably violent sword shadow appeared, slashing towards Niet Tian's mirror image. Mirror image Niet Tian reacted very quickly. Wings of Star Soul appeared on his back. With a flap of the wings, he instantly retreated 1,000 meters away, avoiding the frontal attack of the sword shadow. Pong! But he was still affected by the sword shadow's violent waves. His body shook violently, and he flew out. Mirror image Niet Tian stabilized his body, and he immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. Intieni's power was too strong. The power of the sword was enough to kill him in an instant. Fortunately, he retreated in time. Otherwise, if he was hit by the sword shadow head-on, he would definitely die. Yet Tian watched from afar, and his eyes were filled with shock. He estimated that Tian's combat power was already close to that of a half-sage. Qin Shohan was indeed terrifying. Just the power of a single sword mark was enough to make Tian's strength so heaven-defying. This Tian is indeed very strong. Feng Qi, who was at the side, was also shocked. But then he smiled and said, "Let these three guys fight. When all three of them are injured, then we will make a move and reap the benefits." Yet Tian smiled faintly. That was exactly what he was thinking. Tian, mirror image Nietan, mirror imaging Tian. These three people were all very strong. Tian and Feng Qi only needed to quietly watch the battle now. After the three of them finished fighting, they would come out to clean up the mess. Tian, let me tell you how to use the 9 inverse sword range. At this moment, mirror image Tian's voice came from the sky. His figure moved, and his entire body sword intent was released violently. At this moment, mirror image Tian actually activated the 9 inverse sword range. 9 inverse sword range. Tian was stunned for a moment, and then he shouted, "Who are you? Why do you have the 9 inverse sword range?" Mirror image Tian smiled cold, but did not speak. The sword intent continued to surge wildly. Tian and Feng Qi felt the aura of mirror image Tian, and they couldn't help but frown. After mirror image Tian activated the 9 inverse sword range, he was even scarier than the previous Tian. Tian, to be able to die under your own 9 inverse sword range, this should be an honor for you. Mirror image Tian smiled cold, and then he slashed down with his sword. The void rumbled, and a sword shadow of nearly 10,000 meters appeared, squeezing the space and falling down. Arrogant, Tian roared, and similarly slashed down with his sword. Endless flames appeared, and the sword shadow tumbled like a sea of fire. Boom! Boom! The two sword shadows were equally terrifying, like two fire dragons, roaring. Kaboom! In the next moment, the two sword shadows collided, and the void suddenly trembled. In the next moment, there was an endless wave of flames. Suddenly, the space within tens of thousands of meters was completely turned into a sea of fire. Chi chi chi! Waves of flames tumbled, like a flaming beast, swallowing terrifying tongues of fire, as though it was going to burn everything. Tian and mirror image Tian were drowned by the endless waves of flames at the same time, and disappeared without a trace. Tian felt the blazing aura, and he couldn't help but frown, and his eyes were filled with surprise. This clash of swords was really terrifying and beyond imagination. These two guys are dead, right? Feng Qi's eyes were dull, and he said in astonishment, "Huh." At this moment, Tian's eyes suddenly froze, and his face suddenly changed. He then turned around and looked at the void. At the place where his eyes landed, a figure stood, and at this moment, he was staring at him with incomparable coldness. Tian's face was gloomy, and he also stared at the other party. At this moment, the person he was facing was not someone else, but his own mirror image. Tian and mirror image Tian looked at each other, and both pairs of eyes were equally cold and murderous. "Damn, I've been discovered." At this moment, Feng Qi suddenly reacted and couldn't help but scream. Chapter 26-27. Chapter 26-27. The big reading Gift in the Void. Tian and his mirror image looked at each other. The atmosphere was very strange. "You're actually not surprised to see me." At this time, the mirror image Tian opened his mouth. His eyes were very evil, as if there was the deepest darkness hidden in them. He didn't expect that when Tian saw him. He wasn't surprised at all. Instead, he was very calm. "You're just a mirror image. Why should I be surprised?" Tian smiled faintly and looked calm. Mirror image Tian heard Tian's words and couldn't help but be surprised. He said in a deep voice, "You're really smart. You understand so quickly." "Same here." Tian smiled faintly and said, "If I'm not wrong, you're a mirror image created by the 9th door of the Ghost Emperor, right?" The mirror image Niet Tion in front of him must be created by the ninth door of the Ghost Emperor. Otherwise, he couldn't be so strong. Mirror image Niet Tion laughed and said, "Is this what you know about the door of the Ghost Emperor?" Niet Tion went blank for a moment before his heart sank. It seemed that the door of the Ghost Emperor was more complicated than he thought. Could it be that there were other mysteries? Those two guys are not dead. At this moment, Feng Qi suddenly screamed and looked into the sky. Niet Tion frowned and turned to look. He saw Yin Tianyi and mirror image Yin Tianyi standing in the sky. However, the two of them were very miserable. Their bodies were covered in blood. Obviously, their injuries were not light. In the collision just now, it was already unbelievable that these two guys could survive. Even if Yin Tianyi used the power of the selfless sword seal, he could only fight with mirror image Yin Tianyi until both of them were injured. Yin Tianyi, the power of your sword seal has been used up. Wait for your death. Mirror image Yin Tianyi sneered and his eyes were cold. Yin Tianyi's expression was ugly. Then, he turned around and saw Niet Tion and Feng Qi. What's going on? When he saw the two Niet Tions, his eyes flickered, and the astonishment in his heart was written all over his face. First, there was a person who looked exactly like him, and then there were two Niet Tions. What was going on? Yin Tianyi was in a complete mess. He could not figure out everything in front of him. Niet Tion, take care of your own problems. Leave those two to me. At this moment, Feng Qi let out a laugh. Then, his body moved, and he flew towards the location where Yin Tianyi was at. He left Niet Tion's mirror image to Niet Tion and went to deal with Yin Tianyi and his mirror image Yin Tianyi. Yin Tianyi, your enemy is here. Let him kill you. The mirror image Yin Tianyi saw Feng Qi rushing over and smiled cold. After which, he absorbed energy from the space and recovered some of his strength before leaving. Yin Tianyi's eyes darkened, and his expression was very ugly. Feng Qi's figure landed and came to a place less than 1,000 meters away from Yin Tianyi. He looked at the latter with a playful gaze and said with a chuckle, "Yin Tianyi, your mirror image is quite smart." He just slipped away. Mirror image? Yin Tianyi was stunned for a moment, and his face was filled with horror. He had no idea what Feng Qi was talking about. Feng Qi smiled faintly. He was not in a hurry to kill Yin Tianyi, but explained to the latter instead. On the other side, Niet Tion and the mirror image Niet Tion were facing each other. Both of them were filled with murderous intent. At this moment, the mirror image Niet Tion was slightly injured, but he had no intention of leaving. He seemed to want to fight with Niet Tion. "Make your move." Niet Tion did not waste any time. He smiled cold and said directly, "Niet Tion, in the Ghost Emperor's tomb, you are no match for me." The mirror image Niet Tianling smiled coldly. Then his entire body surged with sword intent. It was extremely violent, as though it could tear the void apart. Niet Tion's eyes narrowed slightly, and he was secretly surprised. This guy was injured just now, but he can still release such a powerful sword intent. He is indeed powerful. Human sword, star slash. At the next moment, the mirror image Niet Tianling spoke coldly. He roared and star slash slashed down from the sky. A terrifying sword light bloomed, and the brilliance of the sword shot out 10,000 meters away. Boom! The shadow of the sword was like a mountain, crashing down and pressing down on Niet Tion. At this moment, Niet Tion felt the enormous pressure of the sword, and he couldn't help but narrow his eyes. At this moment, he only knew how terrifying his sword technique was. Even he felt that it was difficult to bear such sword pressure. Human sword, star slash. The next moment, Niet Tion's eyes flickered, and he also roared and slashed with his sword. This sword made Niet Tion feel a little excited. To be able to fight with himself, this kind of experience was not often seen. Boom, boom. The same sword technique, the same sword shadow, collided with each other. Boom. In an instant, the two sword shadows fell, and the void suddenly shook. Suddenly, terrifying waves rushed out and surged in the void. Niet Tion was hit by the waves, and his figure was slightly retreating. Chi, chi, chi. The two sword shadows confronted each other in the air, and ear-piercing sounds could be heard. The aura of the sword intent was extremely violent. The strength of the mirror image Nietion was indeed terrifying. Even though he was injured, he could still fight on par with Nietion. Bang! Bang! At this moment, the two sword shadows finally couldn't take it anymore. They swayed at the same time and suddenly collapsed. Nietion's figure retreated for another 1,000 meters, and then he immediately steadied himself. Looking at the mirror image Nietion, he also retreated for 1,000 meters. Nietion, your strength is just SOSO. The mirror image Nietion steadied himself, and the corner of his mouth pulled up into a cold smile. He said coldly, "This sword is a greeting gift for you. The next time we meet, it will be a moment of life and death." After that, the wings of astral soul appeared behind him, and he directly left. Nietion looked at the direction where the mirror image left, but he didn't chase after it. The sword just now made him quite afraid. The strength of the mirror image Nietion was indeed stronger than he expected. "Nietion, you have to be careful next. The strength of this mirror image is stronger than you." At this moment, the voice of Fat Cat sounded, and she said with a low face. Nietion nodded slightly, and his heart was silent. Even if he didn't understand, he had to admit that the battle strength of the mirror image Nietion was indeed above him. What was more terrifying was that the mirror image Nietion was more ruthless, and he wouldn't show any mercy when he attacked. Under normal conditions, Nietion was most likely not the opponent of the mirror image Nietion. At this time, the reason why the mirror image Nietion left must be because he was injured and there was still Feng Qi on the other side. Then, Nietion no longer thought about the mirror image Nietion, but looked at Feng Qi, and his gloomy and stern eyes locked on Yin Tianyi. His figure moved and instantly came to the side of Feng Qi and Yin Tianyi. That guy's the mirror image created by the door of Ghost Emperor? Yin Tianyi, at this time, looked horrified and only reacted after a long time, and said dumbly. Feng Qi had already told him about the door of Ghost Emperor. He then understood why the mirror image Yin Tianyi would know about the selfless sword seal. Although the mirror image Yin Tianyi did not inherit the power of the selfless sword seal, but he knew about this matter. Yin Tianyi, I have already told you about the mirror image. This is to let you die with a little more understanding. At this time, Feng Qi smiled coldly and looked at Yin Tianyi with cold eyes and said, "Next, do you have anything to say? You want to kill me?" Yin Tianyi was stunned and felt the murderous intention that seemed to be real, and his face was extremely frightened. He had just used the selfless sword seal and was also seriously injured by the mirror image Yin Tianyi. At this time, he was already very weak and had no ability to resist. If Nietion and Feng Qi wanted to kill him, it would be a piece of cake. What do you think? Feng Qi smiled cold, and his murderous intention was heavy. Chapter 26-28. The bloody hand reappeared when Feng Qi's voice fell. He immediately took a step out. The killing intent in his body was incomparably thick, almost condensing into a substance, like an invisible big hand, enveloping Yin Tianyi. Don't kill me. Yin Tianyi felt the aura of death approaching. His pupils suddenly constricted, and he screamed in horror. Humph, humph. Feng Qi smiled coldly, walked over step by step, and said, Yin Tianyi, can you give me a reason not to kill you? Yin Tianyi's voice trembled. His tongue was already spinning, and he could not speak. Nietion watched quietly by the side, very calm. At this time, Feng Qi already came to a place less than 10 meters away from Yin Tianyi. As long as he released his aura, he could directly oppress Yin Tianyi to death. I've seen someone before. Yin Tianyi's pupils trembled, but he suddenly shouted and looked at Nietion. Nietion was stunned for a moment and did not bother about Yin Tianyi. It's that girl beside you. Yin Tianyi shouted again, looked at Nietion, and shouted, I know where she is. And, hearing Yin Tianyi's words, Nietion's gaze darkened, and his expression changed. He directly took a step out and asked with a low roar, Where is she? Of course, He knew that the person Yin Tianyi was talking about was Jun Aoqing. Previously, when fighting with Yin Tianyi, Jun Aoqing was also present. He had been looking for Jun Aoqing all along. At this moment, Yin Tianyi said that he knew of Jun Aoqing's news. How could he not be excited? Feng Qi was also stunned for a moment. His figure stagnated and stiffened for a moment. Yin Tianyi looked at Nie Tian, his eyes flickered, and said, "I'll bring you to find her. You guys can't kill me, and you have to protect me." He had just used the selfless sword seal, and now he was very weak, and in the next few days he would be in a weak state. The Ghost Emperor's tomb was extremely dangerous. In his current state, it was impossible for him to survive. He needed someone to protect him. Nie Tian and Feng Qi were strong enough to protect him. "Speak, where is it?" Nie Tian completely ignored Yin Tianyi's request. With a low roar, a terrifying killing intent was released from his body, enveloping Yin Tianyi. "Agree to my request. Otherwise, I won't say it even if I die." Yin Tianyi was actually not afraid at this moment, as he said solemnly. He knew that this was his only chance to survive, so he had to persevere to the end. "I promise you." Nie Tian frowned. Without hesitation, he agreed and growled, "Speak, where is he?" "All right, I'll bring you to look for him right now." Yin Tianyi's eyes lit up when he got Nie Tian's promise. Nie Tian nodded and glanced at Feng Qi. "Let's keep this guy alive for now. Finding him is more important." Feng Qi nodded and said with a faint smile. At this moment, many martial artists appeared in midair. They were all people from the Frosttooth Valley. When they heard the battle, they all ran out. Nie Tian and the others ignored these people and prepared to leave immediately. Nie Tian, Feng Qi. Just as they were about to turn around and leave, a familiar voice rang out. "Huang Fu Hong." Nie Tian and Feng Qi turned at the same time and shouted the person's name. Huang Fu Hong's figure flew over, very excited. Nie Tian's gaze was fixed on Huang Fu Hong. Very quickly, he confirmed that the latter was not a mirror image, and then he relaxed. "Nie Tian, Feng Qi, I finally found you." Huang Fu Hong was very excited, and he directly came to Nie Tian and the others. "There's no time to say more. Let's leave now," Nie Tian said. Then he said to Yin Tianyi, "Lead the way." Then, the four figures moved together and quickly disappeared into the void. Along the way, Huang Fu Hong told them what happened after he came to the Ghost Emperor's tomb. It turned out that he also met mirror image martial artists, but they were all people he did not know. Feng Qi explained the matter of the mirror image, and Huang Fu Hong's face was filled with shock. About half an hour later, under Yin Tianyi's lead, Nie Tian and the others arrived outside a huge valley. "The girl you're looking for is in this valley." Yin Tianyi pointed at the valley in front of them and said with some fear. Nie Tian felt that the valley in front of him was a little strange, and he could not help but frown. Then, he took a step forward and came to a place 1,000 meters away from the valley. He spread out his divine sense and tried to sense it. Boom! But at this moment, he suddenly felt a very terrifying mental strength descend, directly attacking his divine sense. In an instant, Nie Tian felt a terrifying mental deterrence, making his divine sense almost collapse. He hurriedly withdrew his divine sense, and his forehead was already dripping with cold sweat. His face was horrified. "Nie Tian, are you all right?" Feng Qi walked over and asked nervously when he saw Nie Tian's reaction. Nie Tian took a deep breath, calmed down, and waved his hand to indicate that he was fine. Fortunately, he had withdrawn his divine sense in time. Otherwise, that frightening mental energy would have crushed his divine sense. "This valley is strange." Nie Tian frowned, looked at the valley in front of him, and said solemnly. Then, he turned to look at Yin Tianyi and asked, "Yin Tianyi, are you sure Jun Aoqing is in the valley?" "Yes." Yin Tianyi nodded heavily and said, "I saw her enter the valley with my own eyes." And Nie Tian's brows furrowed, his expression incomparably somber as he asked, "Speak clearly, what's going on?" Yin Tianyi's eyes flickered incessantly, clearly hiding something. Yin Tianyi's eyes constricted, knowing that he could not hide it anymore, and could only tell the truth. It turned out that Tianyi encountered Jun Ouching not long after coming to the Ghost Emperor remnants. He knew that Jun Ouching had a close relationship with Tian and the rest, so he wanted to kill her. But Jun Ouching's movement technique was strange and escaped from his hands. He chased all the way and saw Jun Ouching enter the valley in front of him. He originally wanted to enter the valley too, but he was blocked by a terrifying force, and was even almost killed by that force. So when Tianyi came to this valley again at this time, he was very terrified. Tian finished listening to Tianyi's words. His expression was incomparably somber. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for Tianyi to lie. But Tian could not understand why Jun Ouching could enter the valley easily, but Tianyi could not. Tian, there's indeed something wrong with this valley. Fengqi seemed to have noticed something at this time, and said with a tight frown. Tian looked at the valley, thought for a moment, and said, "You guys wait for me here, I'll go try. You have to be careful." Fengqi reminded Tian. He kept feeling that this stretch of valley was enveloped by a strange force, very sinister. Tian, there's something wrong with this valley, you have to be careful. And right at this time, Fat Cat's voice also sounded out, reminding Tian. Tian nodded his head, and could not help but be somewhat nervous. Fat Cat did not say too much, clearly not seeing the real problem yet. Just what was so strange about this valley. Then, Tian approached step by step, paying attention to everywhere. Every step was cautious, and did not dare to be the slightest bit careless. As he got closer to the valley bit by bit, Tian increasingly felt that there seemed to be an evil force surging in the space, and it was extremely strange. That evil force made him feel an invisible pressure, but when he tried to sense it carefully, the evil force disappeared. After a few minutes, Tian walked to a place about 100 meters away from the valley. At this time, he felt the pressure around his body was very terrifying, as if there was an invisible giant hand holding him tightly, making him unable to breathe. He took a deep breath, forced himself to calm down, and then took a step out. Boom! At this time, there was a sudden fluctuation in the void, and then an invisible force appeared, enveloping the entire valley. In the sky above the valley, a strange scene appeared. Chapter 26:29. Chapter 26:29. Chapter 26:29. Spatial enchantment. Tian's eyes widened as he was taken aback by the sudden change. Although he had been careful, he did not expect something like this to happen. Above the valley, the giant blood-colored hand covered the entire valley. Heaven and earth turned red, and the air was filled with a bloody smell. At the same time, Tian felt an invisible giant hand wrapping around him, making it difficult for him to move. He couldn't even move an inch. In the distance, Fengqi and the others stared blankly at the giant blood-colored hand in the sky. Their faces were filled with shock, and they did not know what to say. The unforeseen event in front of them was something that no one had expected. Tian, are you okay? Fengqi shouted after a few seconds and was about to rush over. Don't come near me. Tian growled and shouted, Don't come near me. Fengqi was so scared that he did not dare to go near the valley. He did not know what was going on and was afraid that he would accidentally trigger something and cause Tian to die on the spot. Tian, retreat. At that moment, Fat Cat's voice was heard. It seemed to have discovered something, and it said in shock. Tian nodded, took a deep breath, and was ready to retreat. However, his body was surrounded by an invisible force. His feet felt like they were filled with lead sand, and he could not move at all. He did not dare to be careless. He carefully released his star energy to fight against the invisible force around him. Retreat. But suddenly Little Fat Cat let out a strange cry, extremely panicked. Boom! Tian's eyes narrowed. He did not hesitate, and the star energy in his body surged out to fight against the pressure around him. Boom! At this moment, the void suddenly shook. Whoosh! In the next moment, a blood-colored blade suddenly appeared out of thin air and slashed directly towards Tian. The blood-colored blade was not strong. It was only a few meters long. However, its murderous aura was terrifying. It seemed like it could tear everything apart. Cold. In the blink of an eye, Niet Tian felt a bone-piercing coldness, which caused his pupils to tremble violently. He was incomparably shocked. The aura of death was so real that it was almost suffocating. Break! At the moment of life and death, Niet Tian let out a roar. The invisible force in the air finally loosened. He took a few steps back. Whoosh! At that moment, the blood-colored blade whizzed past, almost brushing past Niet Tian's chest with incomparable sharpness. Puff! 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 The blood-colored blade was like an arrow piercing through the air, directly piercing through countless boulders and giant trees. Everywhere it passed, the boulders and giant trees were all shattered. On the ground, a bottomless ravine appeared. It was actually forcefully created by the bloody aura. Hiss! Feng Qi and the others sucked in a breath of cold air at the sight of this, their faces filled with extreme shock. That seemingly unremarkable blood-color blade was actually so powerful. It was unimaginable. Outside the valley, Niet Tian stabilized his body. His face was as pale as a piece of paper. A bloody wound could be seen on his chest. Although the blood-colored blade didn't hit him, the sharp aura tore open a bloody wound on his chest. Niet Tian was a powerful cultivator, yet he was injured by the blood-colored blade. It was enough to show how powerful the blade was. That was close. After a while, Niet Tian calmed down and said with a frightened expression, "Luckily, he had broken free from the force in time. Otherwise, he would have died if he had been hit by the blood-colored blade." The blood-colored blade was too terrifying. Its sharp aura was terrifying. At that instant, Niet Tian suddenly realized that the invisible force surrounding him had disappeared. He could not help but exclaim in surprise. However, the giant blood-colored hand that was suspended above the valley was still there, releasing a bloody aura in all directions. Fat, what happened just now? Niet Tian became cold. He took a few steps back and asked in a deep voice. Fortunately, Fat Cat had reminded him in time. Otherwise, Niet Tian would have been a corpse. Fat Cat seemed to have discovered something. His expression was very frightened. Niet Tian, I sensed a terrifying aura in the valley. It was extremely terrifying. Fat Cat's expression became better. That blood-colored blade came from the terrifying aura in the valley. What aura was that? Niet Tian's eyes narrowed, and he frowned. I'm not sure. Fat Cat shook his head and said, it seemed to be some kind of formation or some kind of bloodline power. It was a very strange aura. As he spoke, Fat Cat's expression became strange again. He seemed to be hesitating about something. Little Fatty, what else did you discover? Niet Tian saw the strange expression on Little Fatty's face, and his eyes narrowed as he asked anxiously. I sensed June's aura. Fat Cat frowned and said in a deep voice, June ouching. Niet Tian's eyes trembled. He exclaimed in his heart, You really are in the valley. Since Fat Cat sensed June ouching's aura, it undoubtedly meant that the latter was in the valley. It seemed that Tianyi was not lying. Niet Tian, I'm afraid it won't be easy for you to save June ouching. Fat Cat's expression darkened. I sense that June ouching is being controlled by a force. I'm afraid she's in danger. Niet Tian's eyes narrowed and his face darkened when he heard Fat Cat's words. Fat, I must enter the valley. Niet Tian roared and took a step forward. However, right at that moment, he was bounced back by a burst of power. Niet Tian was stunned. He looked in front of him in confusion. There was nothing there. What's going on? He exclaimed and tried to touch the area in front of him. His palm came into contact with an invisible force. It was extremely hard, like an invisible boulder lying in front of him. It's a space barrier, Fat Cat said in a deep voice. Niet Tian was taken aback. Then, he touched the invisible barrier with his hand, his face filled with shock. He finally realized that the entire valley was actually enveloped by an enormous spatial barrier. This space barrier was like an invisible wall that separated the valley from the outside world. Just now, this spatial barrier didn't exist. It seemed that Niet Tian had accidentally touched something, causing this spatial barrier to appear. Niet Tian, If you want to enter the valley, you must break this space barrier first. Fat Cat said with a frown. She knew that Nyetian was very anxious. Okay. Nyetian nodded. Then, a ball of flame appeared in his hand. It was the space boundary. It instantly condensed into a flame blade and cut the space barrier in front of him. The space boundary could create space-time, which was extremely destructive to space barriers. In the past, Nyetian had used the space blade to break the space-time vortex. But this time, the result surprised him greatly. Bang! The space blade, formed by the space boundary, touched the space barrier. It made a dull sound as if it had hit an indestructible iron plate. Nyetian frowned and then exerted force. Chapter 2630. The Scarlet Valley, the universe blade shattered. Nyetian's eyes widened as he exclaimed, "How is this possible?" He didn't expect that the space boundary in front of him was so powerful that even the universe blade couldn't break it. Let's try again. The next moment, an even more blazing space boundary appeared on Nyetian's palm, and a more powerful universe blade appeared. Crack! Without hesitation, Nyetian hacked with the universe blade again, but the result was the same. The universe blade shattered again. Nyetian was taken aback. He was dumbfounded. Obviously, the space boundary in front of him was much more powerful than he had imagined. The universe blade alone couldn't break the space boundary at all. What should we do? Nyetian's heart was burning with anxiety. Like an ant on a hot pan, beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. June Ouching was in the valley, and she was in danger. He was outside the valley, but he couldn't get in. How could he not be anxious? Nyetian, don't worry. Give me some time. At this time, the voice of the Fat Cat was heard, and then it showed up directly. Feng Qi and the others looked at Nyetian from afar. They didn't dare to approach because they didn't know what Nyetian was doing. When Feng Qi saw the Fat Cat, he suddenly screamed and almost laughed. Garfield? However, the atmosphere was so depressing that he had to swallow his laughter. After the Fat Cat showed up, it began to sense the space boundary bit by bit. Nyetian just watched from the side. He couldn't help, so he could only be anxious. Half an hour later, the Fat Cat's forehead was covered with beads of sweat. Fat, how is it? Nyetian couldn't help but ask in a low voice. Found it, the Fat Cat finally said. Then it stretched out its paws and released 2 clouds of glazed gas, which attached to the space boundary. Nyetian, those 2 places are the world eyes of the spirit formation. They are also the weakest places in the entire spirit formation. Fat Cat looked at Nyetian and said, have 2 people attack these 2-dimension eyes, then tear the barrier between them. Yes. Nyetian nodded and took a few steps back. 2 sword essences gushed out of his body and condensed into 2 sword essences doppelgangers. He didn't have Feng Qi and Huang Fuhong act because he didn't know what would happen if the spatial barrier was broken. Make your move. Following this, Nyetian nodded slightly. With a thought, the 2 sword intent clones attacked at the same time, slashing at the 2 world eyes. Boom! Right at that moment, the spatial barrier in the sky suddenly trembled and let out a loud rumble. This is the moment. Nyetian's eyes flickered, and he roared in his heart. The blade of the universe appeared in his hand. He moved and directly slashed. Bang! As the blade of the universe landed, a muffled sound was heard. Following this, an invisible gap appeared on the spatial barrier. Nyetian sensed the appearance of the gap in the barrier. His eyes focused, and he immediately unleashed an even more violent boundary of the universe. The gap in the spatial barrier instantly widened, but it was still not enough for anyone to pass through. Bang! However, at that moment, the spatial barrier suddenly unleashed a tremendous pressure. In an instant, Nyetian felt a terrifying pressure in the sky, as if his body was going to be torn apart. He couldn't help but let out a cry of agony due to the sudden pain. Nyetian, Feng Qi, and the others couldn't help but exclaim when they saw this, and they all rushed forward. Bang! Bang! At that moment, the 2 sword intent clones that Nyetian had condensed finally couldn't withstand the pressure in the space and directly collapsed. Seeing this, Fat Cat was so scared that his face stiffened, and then he screamed, "Little Feng, little Huangfu, hurry up." The two sword intent clones disappeared, and the eye returned to its original state. Nie Tian would be directly devoured by the powerful pressure in the space. Feng Qi and Huangfu Hong reacted quickly. They moved at the same time and directly attacked the two eyes. Bang! The eye received a powerful attack, and instantly the entire spatial barrier shook violently. Buzz! The next moment, the space seemed to be under great pressure and actually let out a groan. "Break for me!" Nie Tian felt the pressure from the space suddenly weaken. Immediately, he roared and the blade of the universe in his hand suddenly expanded, releasing the terrifying power of time and space. Bang! Crack, crack, crack! The spatial barrier directly let out a roar and then collapsed inch by inch. In the space, countless glaring cracks appeared like white light blades. Bang! The next moment, the spatial barrier could no longer withstand the pressure and suddenly collapsed. Bang! At this moment, a terrifying shockwave spread out in all directions like a ripple. Bang! 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 Nie Tian and the other two were directly hit by the invisible force and directly flew backward, smashing heavily on the ground. Boom! Bang, bang, bang. The surrounding rocks and plants were also hit by the impact and directly collapsed. Everything within a radius of tens of thousands of meters was directly crushed. After a long time, the terrifying force in the void completely disappeared. Nie Tian stood up, a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth, but his injuries were not serious. He looked at Feng Qi and Huangfu Hong, who stood up with difficulty, and frowned. "Feng Qi, Huangfu Hong, are you okay?" Feng Qi and Huangfu Hong both shook their heads to indicate that they were both fine. However, the two of them did not know what exactly happened just now and what the invisible barrier in the void was. Nie Tian used his divine sense to check and confirm that Feng Qi and Huangfu Hong were not seriously injured. He did not explain too much and directly rushed towards the valley. Nie Tian, Feng Qi, and Huangfu Hong saw this and exclaimed in unison. They did not expect that Nie Tian would rush over just like that. The valley in front of them was too strange and full of murderous intent. However, Nie Tian did not care and directly rushed towards the valley. This time, he was not obstructed by any force and directly entered the valley. However, after entering the valley, the scene in front of him stunned him. The entire valley was filled with an extremely strong smell of blood. The air was intertwined with blood-colored filaments, crisscrossing in all directions, like a huge blood vessel. And where the countless blood vessels converged, there was a huge blood-colored vortex. At this time, there was a figure lying quietly in the blood-colored vortex. When Nie Tian saw the figure in the blood-colored vortex, his eyes suddenly narrowed, and he directly exclaimed, "Jun Ouching." Immediately after, his figure moved, and he wanted to rush over. However, at this moment, Fat Cat's voice was heard, shouting in horror, "Don't move." When Nie Tian heard Fat Cat's voice, his body suddenly stopped, and he froze on the spot, not daring to move an inch. It seemed that Fat Cat had discovered something terrible. "Fat, what's wrong?" Nie Tian asked after taking a deep breath and forcing himself to calm down. "Nie Tian, this valley is a huge killing formation. You must not be impulsive. Just stay where you are and don't move," Fat Cat said in a deep voice. He was extremely careful, and even his voice was lowered. Nie Tian nodded slightly, and his eyes looked at Jun Ouching in the blood-colored vortex. He was even more worried. Chapter 26:31. Chapter 26:31. Chapter 261, Killing Formation. Nie Tian stood at the entrance of the valley and stared at Jun Ouching, but he did not dare to take another step forward. At this moment, he also felt that the crisscrossing bloodlines in the valley were extremely terrifying. They seemed to contain a very frightening power. Just the aura alone was enough to make one feel suffocated. Nie Tian, leave the valley first, Fat Cat said cautiously. Nie Tian took a deep breath, nodded, and slowly retreated out of the valley. He knew that at this moment, he had to be even more calm. Fat Cat entered the valley and began to slowly sense the killing formation. Nye Tian. At this moment, Feng Qi and Huang Fu Hong arrived. They first shouted, then saw the scene in the valley, and were stunned, speechless for a long time. How could they have imagined that there would be such a scene in the valley? Stay outside the valley, don't go near, Nye Tian said in a low voice, signaling Feng Qi and Huang Fu Hong not to go any further. Feng Qi and Huang Fu Hong retreated almost subconsciously. This strange, blood-colored valley, just one look at it, and they could not help but want to stay away. Nye Tian, what is going on? Feng Qi could not hold back his curiosity and asked quietly. Nye Tian shook his head and did not say anything. He also did not know what was going on in front of him. How did June Ouching enter the valley? How did she enter the blood-colored vortex? Nye Tian became cold and tried to sense June Ouching's aura, but the result made him take a deep breath. He felt that the power in June Ouching's body was weakening bit by bit. It was that blood-colored vortex that was constantly absorbing June Ouching's power. The strangest thing was that Nye Tian felt that the blood-colored threads in the valley were like real blood vessels. It was very strange. June Ouching's power flowed through the blood whirlpool and into the blood vessels in the valley. Nye Tian sensed the flow of power, and to his surprise, discovered that it eventually converged on a rather thick vein. He focused his attention on this thick bloodline, and sensed that this bloodline was releasing a terrifying evil energy. It was as if this evil energy was supporting the operation of the entire killing array. At this moment, Feng Qi seemed to have discovered something and said, "Look at that thicker vein. What does it look like?" Upon hearing Feng Qi's words, Nye Tian's eyes narrowed and his expression changed. "It's like a Yuan meridian." Huang Fu Hong exclaimed in surprise. "Could that be a Yuan meridian?" Feng Qi's eyes trembled as he exclaimed once more. At this moment, Nye Tian's expression froze. He also realized that the thick vein indeed looked like a martial artist's Yuan meridian, but this was too strange. In a blood-colored valley, there was actually a martial artist's Yuan meridian. What kind of martial artist could survive after their Yuan meridian was extracted? Everything in front of him was too strange. Nye Tian could not understand it at all. Nye Tian, your guess is correct. At this time, the little fat cat walked out. Its face was very pale, but its eyes were very excited. It said, "The place where all the blood meridians converge is that thick blood meridian. This blood vessel is a martial artist's Yuan meridian." "It really is a Yuan meridian," Feng Qi exclaimed. He was stunned on the spot and was speechless for a long time. Nye Tian and Huang Fu Hong were also dumbfounded. They were incomparably shocked. After a while, Nye Tian became cold. He stared at Fat Cat and asked, "Fat, what is going on?" "It's actually very simple. This killing array is a killing array created by a martial artist extracting one of his own Yuan meridian and using it as the eye of the array." Fat Cat nodded, unable to hide the shock in her eyes. Nye Tian was stunned once again. He was extremely shocked. Extracting one's own Yuan meridian and using it as the eye of the array to create a killing array. This method could be considered as stealing the fortune of heaven and earth. At the same time, this method was also very frightening. The method of extracting one's own Yuan meridian was too cruel. Ordinary people could not understand it. I have seen countless great arrays, but this method of using the Yuan meridian as the eye of the array and the blood vessels as the array patterns is the first time I've seen it. Fat Cat nodded and said in a deep voice, "Fat, you mean that the blood vessels in this valley are real?" Nye Tian was stunned and asked in surprise. "Yes." Fat Cat nodded and said, "The blood vessels in the entire valley are actually formed by the fusion of real blood vessels and a kind of array intent. The blood-red blade that attacked you just now was released by this killing array." This, Nye Tian sucked in a breath of cold air, not knowing what to say. The power of the blood-color blade, just now, was unimaginably strong. If not for Nye Tian's quick reaction, he would have died on the spot. He never thought that the blood-red blade came from a killing array. No wonder Fat Cat told him not to move. If he triggered the killing intent of the killing array, he would definitely not have any chance of survival. Fat, how did Ouching enter the valley? At this time, Nietion suddenly thought of something and asked with a frown. The killing array in front of him was so terrifying. How did June Ouching enter? And how did she enter the blood-red vortex? This is the more mysterious part of this killing array. Fat Cat's eyes flickered slightly and said, I guess that the entire killing array should be a trap. The purpose of the killing array's existence seems to be to absorb the power of powerful blood vessels. This Yuan Meridian killing array must have taken a fancy to the Nether Ghost Meridian in June Ouching's body. So it let June Ouching enter the killing array and then controlled her to absorb the power of her Nether Ghost Meridian. Nietion was stunned and could not react for a long time. The person who built the Yuan Meridian killing array was too vicious. Using one's own Yuan Meridian to build the array and then letting other martial artists enter the killing array to absorb the power of their blood vessels. This method was simply heaven-defying. It was hard to imagine what kind of person could build such a terrifying killing array. No wonder Nietion sensed that the blood-red vortex was constantly absorbing June Ouching's power. If not for Nietion breaking the space boundary, June Ouching's power would have been completely absorbed by the killing array, and the final outcome would be death. Fat, how do I save her? Then, Nietion calmed down completely and asked in a deep voice. The most direct way to destroy the Yuan Meridian killing array is to destroy the Yuan Meridian. Fat Cat frowned and said, but this way, the entire killing array will be completely destroyed, and June Lass will be in danger. Then what should we do? Nietion's eyes narrowed, and he asked anxiously. I've already thought it through. Little Fat Cat smiled faintly and said, I've already drawn out the diagram of the entire killing array. You just need to follow the markings on the diagram and slowly cut the connection points of the formation runes, and you will be able to destroy the killing array. With a thought, the little Fat Cat transmitted the blueprint of the spell formation into Nietion's mind. A diagram of the formation appeared in Nietion's divine sense. Sure enough, he saw the connection points of the formation runes. The place where these formation patterns were connected to the bloodline was the killing formation's weakness, as well as its weakest point. As long as Nietion destroyed the connection points of the formation runes bit by bit, he would be able to destroy the killing array and save June Ouching. Nietion, this Yuan Meridian killing array is very dangerous. Don't be impatient and do it bit by bit. Don't be careless, understand? Fat Cat looked at Nietion and warned him in a serious tone. The Yuan Meridian killing array was very scary. One careless mistake could lead to a tragic death. Understood. Nietion nodded his head, his eyes filled with confidence. Chapter 2632. Chapter 2632 of the WR blocking them. Nietion was extremely cautious as he entered the valley. He knew very well that the space around him was filled with killing intent. If he took one wrong step, he would be consigned to eternal damnation. In the valley, if he triggered the killing formation, the blood-color blades could kill Nietion instantly. Feng Qi and Huang Fuhong watched Nietion's figure with their hearts in their throats and nerves stretched to the extreme. Nietion moved forward bit by bit according to the diagram of the formation in his divine sense. He bypassed the crisscrossing bloodline formation runes and finally arrived at the first formation node. He carefully released a wave of sword essence, condensing it into a sword shadow in his palm, and directly fell towards the node of the formation pattern. Bang! With a soft muffled sound, the formation node broke. At this moment, the entire Yuan Meridian killing formation shook slightly. Nietion froze in place, not daring to move an inch. When the killing array regained its tranquility, he began to move, moving towards the next node of the array pattern. Not bad. Fat Cat looked at Nietion from outside the valley and nodded slightly, but she was extremely nervous. The diagram of the formation showed that there were a total of 99 formation nodes. As long as Nietion cut more than half of the formation nodes, he would be able to get close to June Ouching. With Nietion's current speed, it would take him about an hour to cut 50 formation nodes. At this time, Jun Aoqing's power was still being absorbed by the blood-colored vortex. It was extremely dangerous. At the same time, the giant blood-colored hand floating above the valley suddenly moved and released a bloody aura that spread into the void. Nie Tian and the others were focused on the situation in the valley and did not notice the movement of the giant blood-colored hand. From then on, Nie Tian was very careful with every step he took. About half an hour later, Nie Tian cut more than 20 formation nodes. At this time, he was very close to Jun Aoqing. But the closer he was to Jun Aoqing, the denser the formation nodes were and the slower Nie Tian's speed was. At this moment, Fat Cat seemed to sense something and her expression suddenly changed. She then turned around and looked into the void. In his line of sight, two figures appeared. Their auras were strong and their gazes were cold. They were mirror image Nie Tian and mirror image Yin Tianyi. It's them. Feng Qi and Huang Fuhong also saw the two and exclaimed at the same time, "Bastard, you are really destroying the Ghost Meridian blood spring." The mirror image of Yin Tianyi stood tall in the sky. When he saw Nie Tian's figure, he let out a low roar and his gaze was incomparably cold. Nie Tian's mirror image laughed coldly, the killing intent in his eyes growing even more intense. "How dare you ruin the Ghost Emperor's plan? You must be tired of living." The two of them had come here after receiving the message from the giant blood-colored hand. The mirror image Nie Tian told him about the Ghost Emperor's plan, but he didn't know what it meant. In the next moment, mirror image Nie Tian and mirror image Yin Tianyi moved at the same time and flew down towards the valley. "Oh no!" Fat Cat's face darkened when she saw this, and she hurriedly shouted, "Don't let them get close to the valley." At this moment, Nie Tian was in the valley, destroying the vital meridian killing formation bit by bit, which was the Ghost Meridian blood spring that mirror image Yin Tianyi mentioned. If he was disturbed, he would definitely die. Feng Qi and Huang Fuhong both reacted and nodded heavily. Their figures moved at the same time, rushing towards mirror image Nie Tian and mirror image Yin Tianyi. Feng Qi knew how terrifying the mirror image Yin Tianyi was. He immediately rushed towards the latter and stabbed horizontally with the Fengyun blaze in his hand. Boom! In midair, the shadow of the spear was like a wild dragon, breaking through the air and pressing down on mirror image Yin Tianyi. So strong. Mirror image Yin Tianyi felt the terrifying power of the spear and couldn't help but frown and exclaim. Feng Qi's own strength wasn't weak. In addition, he had just absorbed the power of inheritance, and his strength had reached the peak of half-step. His spear principal realm had also reached the legendary realm of spear and martial arts as one. This made his combat strength almost reach the level of a half-sage. Nine Heaven's Sword. Feeling the terror of Feng Qi, mirror imaging Tianyi didn't dare to be careless. He immediately started the 9 sword vein. The sword intent in his body instantly erupted. The 9 wind and fire swords slashed down, and a huge shadow of the sword whizzed out, stirring up the void. Boom! In the next moment, the shadow of the spear and the shadow of the sword collided. There was a loud bang in the sky, and endless power exploded crazily, spreading in all directions. On the other side, Huang Fuhong and mirror image Nie Tian were also fighting. Boom! In the void, a flame sword shadow and an extreme ice sword shadow collided. The extreme collision of ice and fire caused the entire void to tremble. High up in the sky, for figures were fighting 2 against 2, and the battle was extremely fierce. Fortunately, these two guys are strong enough, otherwise it would be troublesome. Fat Cat looked at the void, and her tensed face relaxed a little. Feng Qi and Huang Fuhong were both top geniuses. Even if they couldn't kill mirror image Nie Tian and mirror imaging Tianyi, they were more than enough to block these two guys. In the valley, Nie Tian didn't get distracted. He focused on cutting the nodes of the formation pattern. In such a situation of high concentration, his mental strength was greatly consumed. However, he still sped up, hoping to rescue Jun Aoqing as soon as possible, and then help Feng Qi and Huang Fuhong. Next, the battle in the sky continued. Feng Qi, I didn't expect your strength to actually become stronger. Mirror imaging Tianyi was forced to retreat under Feng Qi's crazy charge. He stopped and said with a low face. And the real Tianyi below was also very shocked at this moment. 10 days ago, he fought with Feng Qi and easily defeated the latter. But now, he felt that Feng Qi's strength was already above his. You are Tianyi's mirror image. You should know that Tianyi and I are archenemies. Feng Qi sneered, and the fierce wind spear in his hands swept around. He said sternly, since I can't kill the real Tianyi, I will first kill an impostor to vent my hatred. Finishing, his figure moved, and a spear swept out. The spear intent drew a terrifying wave in the air, like a stormy sea, and pressed towards mirror image Tianyi. Mirror image Tianyi frowned, and with a slash of his sword, the sword shadow rushed out. But this sword shadow, whether in terms of momentum or speed, was much weaker than Feng Qi Bam. In the next moment, the sword shadow was hit by the violent force and directly collapsed. Not good. Mirror image Tianyi's eyes trembled, and he cried out in shock. Bam! In the next moment, there was a muffled sound in the air, and mirror image Tianyi flew out directly, drawing a bloody trail in the air. Seeing this, Feng Qi's lips curled up coldly. His figure moved, and he wanted to strike with his spear again to directly kill mirror image Tianyi. But at this moment, there was a scream from the other side, and Huangfu Hong's figure also flew out in the void. Huangfu Hong fought with all his might, but he was still not mirror image Tian's opponent. Huangfu Hong. Feng Qi's eyes darkened, and then his figure moved, and he flew towards Huangfu Hong's direction. But right at this moment, he suddenly felt a ghastly cold air assaulting him from behind, causing his expression to change in a flash. He suddenly turned around and wanted to make a move, but it was too late. Boom! In the void, a sword shadow appeared, but like a ghost, it directly appeared and attacked Feng Qi. Feng Qi's gaze suddenly trembled, and his eyes revealed fear. Chapter 26:33. Never retreat, Bang. In the void, Feng Qi had no time to react and was hit by the sword shadow. His figure flew out like a kite with a broken string. He spurted out a mouthful of blood in midair. This is bad. Fat Cat looked at the scene in the sky, and her heart sank. She looked at the other side of the void and saw a beautiful figure standing there. It was Jun Aoqing. The sword attack just now was from Jun Aoqing. Of course, she was not the real Jun Aoqing, but a doppelganger of Jun Aoqing. It seemed that the killing formation in the Bloody Valley was very important as it attracted so many mirror image powerhouses at the same time. Feng Qi flew back for thousands of meters and finally stabilized his body. There was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth, and his face was very pale. I didn't expect Jun Aoqing's strength to be so strange. He looked at the mirror image of Jun Aoqing and said in a deep voice, it seemed that this mirror image of Jun Aoqing was not strong. Although the sneak attack was successful, it did not cause any fatal damage to Feng Qi. Brother Feng, are you okay? On the other side, Huangfu Hong's figure also stabilized, but he was seriously injured and there were several bloody wounds on his body. Don't worry, I won't die. Feng Qi looked at Huangfu Hong and shouted, Huangfu, can you still hold on? Huangfu Hong's body trembled and said, for friend, I, Huangfu Hong, will not retreat even half a step. At this moment, Tian was in the valley and could not be disturbed. Although Huangfu Hong was seriously injured, he did not have the slightest fear. Instead, he was full of fighting spirit. Good. Feng Qi laughed and said, then let us play with these mirror images. After saying that, his eyes trembled. His eyes were like the abyss, incomparably deep. Next, he was going to use the Eye of Doomsday. At the same time, Huangfu Hong's body shook. His entire body released a terrifying sword intent. His aura was even stronger than before. He activated the extreme ice demonic seal and prepared to fight with his life on the line. For the sake of Tian, Feng Qi and Huangfu Hong defended the valley and fought to the death. Tian, you've made the right friend. Little Fat Cat's eyes narrowed as it looked at the two people high up in the sky and thought to itself, "Can the two of you defend it?" The mirror image Niet Tianling laughed coldly. The sword aura around his body was like a roaring ocean. Waves of berserk sword intent were incredibly sharp, tearing everything apart. "Whether or not I can defend it, you'll know once you try." Feng Qi smiled faintly, fearless. "If we can defend, we must defend. If we can't, we must defend even more." Huang Fu Hong's reply was completely different, but the determination in his eyes was not the slightest bit weaker. Courting death. Nie Tian's mirror image let out a wild laugh as he sprang into action, slashing down with the Star Heaven Slash. A sword made of starlight appeared, and like a waterfall, it shot towards Feng Qi. This guy is indeed stronger than Yin Tianyi. Feng Qi felt the terrifying aura of the sword shadow in the sky, and thought to himself, the mirror image Nie Tian's strength was stronger than the mirror image Yin Tianyi's. This undoubtedly meant that Nie Tian's strength was stronger than Yin Tianyi's. Previously, Nie Tian did not reveal his true strength, but the mirror image Nie Tian was different. He would not hide anything. Swoosh! At this moment, Feng Qi did not hesitate and directly activated the Eye of Doomsday. A doomsday whirlpool appeared in front of him. Boom! The next moment, the terrifying sword shadow fell, but it was directly swallowed by the doomsday whirlpool. Feng Qi's strength had increased, and the ability of the Eye of Doomsday had also increased. The mirror image Niet Tian stabilized his body, frowned suddenly, and looked embarrassed. He had used almost all his strength in the sword attack just now, but it was easily blocked by Feng Qi on the other side. Huang Fu Hong and the mirror imaging Tianyi were fighting fiercely. In the space, only the sword shadow could be seen. But at this moment, the mirror image Jun Aoqing's figure moved, flashed instantly, and attacked the valley. Not good. Seeing this, Fat Cat's face suddenly changed, and he directly screamed, "You dare to spoil the Ghost Emperor's plan, die." The mirror image Jun Aoqing directly came to the outside of the valley, and her eyes were incomparably cold. She shouted, and then her figure moved and directly attacked with her sword. "No!" Fat Cat shouted, and his fat body suddenly shook, and all the colored glass Qi rushed out, turning into a colored glass shield. Pong! In the next moment, the sword shadow bombarded on the colored glass shield, and Fat Cat's figure directly flew out, smashing heavily on the side of the cliff, and his whole body was a bloody mess. In the valley, Nie Tian suddenly saw that Fat Cat was suddenly injured, and couldn't help but shout, "Fat!" At this moment, he was only left with the last few formation nodes, and soon he would be able to rescue Jun Aoqing and destroy the Yuan Meridian killing formation. At this moment, he only had a few formation nodes left, and he would soon be able to rescue Jun Aoqing and destroy the Yuan Meridian killing formation. A useless cat, and you want to stop me? You're courting death. At this moment, the mirror image Jun Aoqing suddenly sneered, and then took a step forward and actually attacked Fat Cat with her sword. Although Fat Cat was well-versed in everything, his combat strength was really weak. If this sword fell, his cat life would be over. Bullying Garfield. What kind of ability is that? Just as Fat Cat was about to die, a sneer suddenly came from the sky. Boom! Then, the shadow of a spear fell from the sky, and like a collapsing mountain, it smashed towards the mirror image Jun Aoqing. The mirror image Jun Aoqing suddenly raised her head, and when she saw Feng Qi's figure, her eyes trembled, and she was incomparably shocked. At this time, she wanted to make a move, but to her horror, all the Yuan Meridian in her body was suppressed, and she could not use any strength at all. In the next moment, the shadow of the spear fell, and the mirror image Jun Aoqing was directly submerged, and not even her bones were left. Little Feng, thank you. Cold sweat dripped down Fat Cat's forehead, and he let out a long sigh of relief, and thanked Feng Qi. Feng Qi didn't say anything else, and his body moved, and he once again flew into the sky. The mirror image Niet Tian stood in the sky at this moment, and his face was incomparably gloomy. He had already tried his best, but he still couldn't break Feng Qi's doomsday vortex. "Are you very angry?" Feng Qi looked at the mirror image Nye Tian cold, and with a provocative smile, he said, "I like to see people angry, but helpless. You have angered me." The mirror image Nye Tian looked at Feng Qi, and the coldness in his eyes intensified. He saw that Nye Tian was about to cut open the Yuan Meridian killing formation, and this made him even more furious. "So what if I angered you? What can you do to me?" Feng Qi laughed, and his expression was extremely arrogant. He didn't want to fight to the death with the mirror image Nye Tian, and he only wanted to delay the latter and wait for Nye Tian to come out of the valley. "You can't afford to pay the price of angering me." The mirror image Nye Tian was completely enraged, and his eyes were as dark as the abyss, and his face was almost distorted. He said in a low voice, "Nine Extreme Chaos Beast, show yourself." As soon as he finished speaking, the body of the mirror image Nye Tian moved slightly, and circles of scarlet halos were released around his body, like huge red ripples surging in the void. Feng Qi was stunned, and his face suddenly darkened. He sensed that there was a very terrifying power in the body of the mirror image Nye Tian, and it was slowly awakening and releasing. At the same time, the fat cat below was completely stunned, and his face was blank, and he was completely petrified. He never expected that the mirror image Nye Tian had actually inherited Nye Tian's 9 Extreme Chaos Beast. Chapter 2634. Chapter 2634 of the WR The Killing Array Collapses Boom. Around the mirror image Nye Tian, circles of crimson halos surged in the void and spread in all directions. It was extremely terrifying. What kind of power is this? Feng Qi's eyes trembled involuntarily as he sensed the powerful aura in the air. His expression was about to become lifeless. He never thought that there was such a terrifying power hidden in the body of the mirror image Nye Tian. I said, "You can't afford to offend me." The mirror image Nye Tian growled. His eyes were filled with a bloody and violent light. He was like a ferocious beast that was about to go berserk. As soon as he finished speaking, a giant crimson beast that was thousands of meters long appeared behind him. It was a powerful threat that shook the heavens and the earth. It was vast and boundless. Roar! The giant crimson beast roared at the sky and released a violent force. It was like a king that had been imprisoned for a long time had finally awakened. This! Feng Qi looked at the giant crimson beast in the void and could not help but gasp. The Eye of Doomsday actually showed great fear. "It's really the 9 Extremes Chaos Beast." Fat Cat screamed. His face was blank, and the panic in his heart was written on his face. The 9 Extremes Chaos Beast stood in the sky like a peerless emperor that ruled the world. Its fiery eyes were like the sun and the moon, looking down on everything. Little Feng, retreat. In the next moment, Little Fat Cat came to its senses and shouted. Feng Qi was very strong, but it was impossible for him to fight against the 9 Extremes Chaos Beast. "What kind of monster is this?" Feng Qi screamed and then stabbed with his spear. The spear's shadow was like a dragon, but when it hit the body of the 9 Extremes Chaos Beast, it collapsed directly. It did not cause any damage to the 9 Extremes Chaos Beast at all. Feng Qi took advantage of the momentum to retreat 1,000 meters and stabilize his body. His eyes were filled with horror. He screamed, "Could this be Nye Tian's primordial spirit?" How could he have imagined that Nye Tian's strongest trump card was the primordial spirit? Generally speaking, after a martial artist reached the divine realm, other than a martial artist with a weapon spirit, other martial artists with a primordial spirit would not use a primordial spirit. However, Nye Tian was an extreme freak. Even though he was about to reach the peak of the god realm, his original spirit was still terrifying, and it was getting more and more terrifying. It was so terrifying that he didn't dare to use it. Feng Qi died. At this time, mirror image Nye Tianling laughed. He moved and stepped on the 9 Extreme Chaos Beast. His eyes were cold and bloodthirsty. The moment he finished speaking, the mirror image Nye Tian took a step forward. Immediately, the aura around the 9th level Chaos Beast roared. Heaven and earth shook, and the void trembled. Feng Qi turned around and saw that Nie Tian was still in the valley. He couldn't help but frown. Then he said in a deep voice, "I can only risk it once." At this moment, he had no way out and could only take it head-on. Roar! The next moment, the ninth extremity chaos beast roared angrily and started running in the void. Its ferocious aura was unstoppable. Boom! The aura around Feng Qi's body suddenly rose, and the spear intent circulated around his body. Feng Yunlai stabbed with his spear, and a terrifying spear shadow appeared. It was 10,000 meters long like a giant beast. It roared and rushed towards the ninth-level chaos beast. The figure of the ninefold chaos beast was like a mountain burning with crimson flames. It was fearless and fearless as it charged forward. Bang! The spear's shadow fell and collided with the ninth-level chaos beast. However, it collapsed directly, turned into a violent spear intent, and dissipated in the void. The body of the ninth-level chaos beast was terrifyingly strong. Even though Feng Qi's combat strength was close to that of a half-saint, he couldn't cause any harm to the ninth-level chaos beast. Damn! Feng Qi was stunned. Then, he let out a strange cry, moved his body, and retreated hurriedly. At this time, he finally knew how scary the ninth-level chaos beast was. Escape? Can you escape? The mirror image Nie Tianling laughed, and the killing intent in his eyes intensified. Since he had released the ninth-level chaos beast, he definitely wouldn't let Feng Qi live. Boom! Boom! At this time, the ninth-level chaos beast, which was running wildly, actually spread its red wings. Suddenly, the void turned red, as if the sunset was falling. Roar! The next moment, the ninth-level chaos beast roared, flapped its wings, and rushed forward crazily. Feng Qi felt the terrifying aura coming from the void, and his eyes narrowed. He was extremely shocked. However, he was still calm. The Eye of Doomsday released a majestic eye power, forming a doomsday whirlpool in front of him, like a shield blocking in front of him. Wow! At this time, the figure of the ninth-level chaos beast arrived, and its huge claws waved, and a terrifying red light appeared, falling from the sky and blasting towards Feng Qi. Boom! The next moment, a violent explosion sounded, and the doomsday whirlpool in front of Feng Qi collapsed. Bam! There was a dull sound, and Feng Qi's figure flew backward like a falling meteor, falling straight to the ground. When Fat Cat saw this scene, he could not help but gasp, and his expression was blank. He knew how terrifying the ninth-level chaos beast was, and Feng Qi had suffered a direct blow from it, so the odds were against him. Feng Qi. On the other side, Huangfu Hong shouted, and his figure moved, flying towards Feng Qi. Unfortunately, it was too late. Boom! Feng Qi's figure was like a huge rock, crashing to the ground, creating a huge pit. In the pit, a blood-colored figure lay there, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Oomph! Can't even withstand a blow. The mirror image Nie Tianling looked coldly at the figure on the ground, laughed coldly, and then turned his gaze to the valley. At the same time, in the valley, Nie Tian was only a few meters away from Jun Aoqing, and there was only one formation node in front of him. Break! Without hesitation, he cut open the formation node, took a step forward, and came to Jun Aoqing's side. At that moment, Jun Aoqing was lying quietly in the blood-colored whirlpool, and her breathing was weak. She had long been unconscious. Nie Tian, hurry! Fat Cat shouted from outside the valley, urging him. Nie Tian agreed, and then a sword formed in his palm, cut open the blood-colored whirlpool, and held Jun Aoqing in his arms. Boom! Boom, boom, boom! At that moment, the huge Yuan Meridian killing formation shook violently, and then it directly collapsed. Leave! Nie Tian's figure moved, and he stepped out of the valley. Boom! The moment his figure landed, the Yuan Meridian killing formation in the valley suddenly collapsed. Boom! At the same time, the giant blood-colored hand above the valley suddenly trembled, and then it came crashing down like a collapsing mountain. Kaboom! In the next moment, the giant blood-colored hand fell, and the ground rumbled. The entire valley collapsed, and a wave of dust rose to the sky. Fat Cat returned to the origin embryo space, and Nye Tion's figure moved, and he retreated a few thousand meters with June ouching. Damn it! In the sky, the mirror image Nye Tion saw the scene below, and he roared like a ferocious beast, extremely angry. Chapter 2635. Chapter 2635 of the WR Battle of the Nine Extremes. Nye Tion was focused on breaking the array in the valley just now and did not pay much attention to other things. At this moment, when he saw Feng Qi seriously injured, the anger in his heart surged. In the next moment, his figure moved and came to Feng Qi's side. "I'm fine." At this time, Feng Qi actually stood up. His whole body was dripping with blood, but his breathing was still stable, and there was no danger to his life. The Nine Extremes Chaos Beast was indeed terrifying. Fortunately, Feng Qi used the Eye of Doomsday to block most of the attack. Otherwise, he would have died a long time ago. Nye Tion, Feng Qi, almost at the same time, Huang Fuhong's figure landed and shouted nervously, "I won't die yet." Feng Qi smiled bitterly. His body trembled slightly. Obviously, he could not fight anymore. "Feng Qi, Huang Fuhong, you've worked hard. Leave the rest to me." Nye Tion looked at Feng Qi and Huang Fuhong and said in a deep voice. He put June ouching down gently and said to Huang Fuhong, "You guys stay here. I'll deal with these mirror images." Huang Fuhong was stunned. He wanted to say something, but was stopped by Feng Qi. "Huang Fu, don't worry. Nye Tion's strength is much stronger than we imagined." Feng Qi smiled and said lightly, Huang Fuhong nodded and said nothing more. In the next moment, Nye Tion's figure rushed into the sky and directly stepped on the high sky. A pair of cold eyes stared at mirror image Nye Tion and mirror imaging Tianyi. "Nye Tion, do you know what you've done?" Mirror image Nye Tion's face was extremely gloomy. He roared furiously. "You destroyed the Ghost Meridian Blood Spring and ruined Lord Ghost the Arca's plan. Don't talk nonsense with him, kill him." Mirror image Tianyi growled, his expression cold and stern. Nye Tion stared at the two of them and said coldly, "You hurt my friend. You deserve to die." He didn't know what the Ghost Emperor's plan was, but he knew that Feng Qi and Huang Fuhong almost died. So now, he must kill these two mirror images. Arrogant. The mirror image Nye Tion growled and shouted arrogantly, "I dare to use the 9th level Chaos Beast. Do you dare?" Nye Tion's eyes narrowed as he looked at the 9 extreme Chaos Beast beneath Nye Tion's feet. His lips curled into a cold smile. The 9th level Chaos Beast was his primordial spirit. He knew very well how terrifying it was. At this point, other than using the 9 extreme Chaos Beast, what other choice did he have? Nye Tion, use it. Fat Cat's voice sounded at this time. Now, Nye Tion had no other choice but to use the 9 extreme Chaos Beast. Nye Tion, have you thought it through? The mirror image Nye Tianling smiled coldly, his eyes full of provocation. "I have," Nye Tion replied in a low voice. Then his body shook, and a scarlet halo was released from his body. It was like the afterglow of the setting sun blooming in the void. The mirror image Nye Tion was stunned. Obviously, he didn't expect that Nye Tion would really dare to release the 9 extreme Chaos Beast. Roar! At this time, a scarlet beast that was thousands of meters long appeared behind Nye Tion. Its violent roar shook the heavens and the earth. So strong. Huang Fuhong saw this scene from below, and his expression was extremely shocked. A martial artist's primordial spirit can actually be so strong. It doesn't make sense. Feng Qi frowned and said strangely, "Very good." In the sky, the mirror image Nye Tion's face darkened, and he said, "Then let us see whether your 9 extreme Chaos Beast is stronger or my 9 extreme Chaos Beast is stronger. You will understand soon. You're just a mirror image." The corner of Nye Tion's mouth twitched, and he smiled coldly. "Is that so?" The mirror image Nye Tion laughed, and then took a step forward. The 9 extreme Chaos Beast under his feet suddenly moved and directly rushed over with a roar. In an instant, the heavens and the earth shook, and the space was instantly pulled tight, as if it was about to collapse. Roar! At the same time, the 9 extreme chaos beast behind Nyetian moved as well. It roared, and the void shook, and a violent force filled the space. The 2 giant beasts were like 2 huge scarlet fireballs, running at extreme speed and clashing crazily. Boom! Boom! The space trembled, and the void was turbulent. Feng Qi and Huang Fuhong were shocked by the scene in front of them. It was hard to imagine that there was such a powerful, primordial spirit in the world. Bang! In the next instant, the 2 giant beasts finally collided, and a deafening sound came from high up in the sky. At this moment, the heavens and the earth became solemn, and space stagnated, as if time and space had stopped. Boom! The next moment, in the center of the collision, a scarlet wave appeared, and the void extended into a huge wave, exploding and extending in all directions. Under the impact of the huge force, the space became blurry, as if it had entered a very mysterious state. Feng Qi and Huang Fuhong were shocked, and they were completely shocked to the point of being speechless. This level of power was too terrifying and definitely not weaker than the power of a half-saint. But right now, Nyetian only had the strength of a late-stage paramount god. Then, the 2 giant beasts separated in the void, and their huge bodies stood tall like 2 mountains. Off to the side, his mirror image Intieni was completely stunned. There was no way he could participate in a battle of this level. In fact, if he got too close, he would be killed by the explosive force. Roar! Roar! The 2 giant beasts threw their heads back and roared, causing heaven and earth to shake again. Then, the 2 giant beasts collided again, and the space around them was filled with terrifying power. Bang! 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 Muffled explosions rang out non-stop. High up in the sky, 2 scarlet fireballs clashed fiercely against each other. It was a battle of absolute power, a battle of flesh and blood. It was brutal, simple, and violent. Moments later, the air was filled with the stench of blood. The bodies of the 2 giant beasts were covered with horrifying wounds. Fresh blood spurted into the void, making it look scarlet and tragic. Yet Tian retreated slightly, blood oozing out of the corner of his mouth, and his face was pale. The brutality of this battle had far exceeded his expectations. If the battle continued, he and his mirror image, Nyetian, would both be heavily injured. Nyetian, this fellow can't hold on much longer. At this time, Fat Cat's excited voice rang out. Roar! Right at this moment, one of the 9th extreme chaos beasts roared out. The scarlet glow around its body suddenly expanded, and a frightening power was released completely. Whoosh! The next moment, the 9th class chaos beasts swung their huge claws, and a scarlet ray of light fell like a huge knife. The scarlet ray of light fell and actually cut off the forearm of the other 9th class chaos beast. Suddenly, the stench of blood in the air thickened, and the space seemed to be covered by a scarlet curtain. This extremely tragic scene made Nyetian frown. Chapter 2636. Chaotic Power. The mirror image. Nyetian's eyes trembled. He was obviously very shocked. He did not expect such a drastic change to occur. Originally, the 2 9-level chaos beasts were evenly matched. But why did Nyetian's 9-level chaos beast suddenly gain the upper hand and almost crush the other 9-level chaos beast's arm? Leave! The mirror image Nyetian reacted and screamed. Then, he moved and wanted to leave. With a thought, the 9-level chaos beast disappeared into space. It's too late to escape now. Nyetian's eyes were extremely cold. He smiled coldly. With a thought, the 9-level chaos beast under his feet grew a pair of red wings. Its huge body was like flames as it flew over. At this time, how could he let the mirror image Nyetian leave? In the blink of an eye, the 9-level chaos beast arrived. Its huge body released an extremely violent aura. No! The mirror image Nyetian felt the huge pressure and could not help but scream. He turned around suddenly and wanted to resist, but it was too late. Wow! The 9-level Chaos Beast's claw landed, and a red light rolled out. Bam! A dull sound came from the void. The mirror image Nietion did not even have time to scream before he died. In the void far away, the mirror image in Tienny's eyes trembled. He was completely stunned by the scene in front of him. His expression was blank, and he could not say a word. You deserve to die too. At this time, Nietion's eyes turned and locked on the mirror image in Tienny's body. He said coldly. The mirror image in Tienny felt the cold, killing intent. His eyes suddenly narrowed. He was so scared that he was stunned. Die! In the next moment, Nietion's figure was already in front of him. The 9-level Chaos Beast waved its claw. Under the red light, the mirror image in Tienny turned into ashes. Almost in the blink of an eye, Nietion killed the two strongest mirror images. Feng Qi and Huangfu Hong watched from below. They were stunned for a long time, like two stone statues. Nietion kept the 9-level Chaos Beast and landed beside Feng Qi and the others. He did not care about them. Instead, he carefully sensed Jun Aoqing's aura to make sure that she was not in danger. After a long while, Feng Qi snapped back to his senses and asked with a flabbergasted expression, Nietion, is that crimson behemoth your primordial soul? Nietion nodded and did not say much. Oh my God, there's actually such a powerful origin spirit in this world. Huangfu Hong cried out in surprise. His throat rolled up and down. He was obviously incomparably shocked. Then, Feng Qi and Huangfu Hong realized how powerful Nietion was. Then, Nietion entered the valley. He wanted to check if he could find anything, but the valley had long collapsed. He could not sense the aura of the array formation at all. Nietion looked helpless. He thought for a while and decided to leave this place first. He would find a quiet place to recuperate. After this battle, everyone was injured and needed to recuperate. At this time, Tienny had long escaped and disappeared. Of course, Nietion would not look for him. He left by himself. If he died, Nietion could not be blamed. Half an hour later, Nietion and the others came to a small valley. After confirming that there was no one inside, they entered directly. Feng Qi and Huangfu Hong sat cross-legged on the ground and entered a state of cultivation to recover their strength. Jun Aoqing still did not wake up. Nietion could not open the 9-level Chaos Beast. He could only put her beside him. Fat, what happened just now? At this time, Nietion suddenly asked. When he was fighting with the mirror image Nietion, they were evenly matched. But the mirror image Nietion's 9-level Chaos Beast seemed to have suddenly become weaker. It was very strange. I also felt that it was strange. Fat Cat frowned and said, I felt that the power of the 9-level Chaos Beast released by the mirror image suddenly became weaker. It was as if someone had taken away its power instantly. So strange? Nietion frowned and looked puzzled. Nietion, do you feel that the aura of the 9-level Chaos Beast released by your mirror image is a little strange? Fat Cat's eyes flickered slightly and asked with a strange expression. Huh? Nietion was stunned at first. Then he frowned and murmured, the aura of the mirror image of the 9-level Chaos Beast is indeed different. It seems to be different from the real 9-level Chaos Beast. Actually, when the two 9-level Chaos Beasts were fighting, Nietion already felt that the aura of the mirror image of the 9-level Chaos Beast was very special. Although it was very similar to the real 9-level Chaos Beast, it was too evil. Also, its body seemed to be hiding a frightening evil power. Nietion was focused on the battle at that time. Of course, he did not care about these things. But now that he thought about it, it was indeed very strange. That's right, Fat Cat said in a low voice. His eyes were surging with a strange light. I feel that no matter how scary the ghost the Arca's door is, it can't duplicate the 9-level Chaos Beast. What do you mean? Nietion was stunned and looked puzzled. He did not know what Fat Cat was talking about. Nietion, do you know how terrifying a 9-level Chaos Beast is? The Fat Cat did not answer Nietion. Instead, she asked him a question. I don't know. Nietion's face stiffened as he shook his head. He only knew that the ninth-level Chaos Beast was very frightening and could not be used casually. Otherwise, it would bring about a disaster. As for how scary the 9 extreme Chaos Beasts were, he really did not know. This time, Nietian had no choice but to use the 9 extreme Chaos Beast. He hoped that nothing would happen. That's right. The fat cat smiled faintly and said, I still do not know the true origins of the 9 extreme Chaos Beasts, but I dare to believe that this power is absolutely unimaginable. A mere ghost the Archdor can't replicate a 9th extreme Chaos Beast at all. Lil Fatty, you mean say, that mirror image Chaos Beast wasn't a real 9th level Chaos Beast, right? Nietian paused for a moment and then asked. Yes. The fat cat nodded and said, the mirror image Chaos Beast only has the appearance of a 9th level Chaos Beast. The power it uses is not the power of chaos at all. The power of chaos? Nietian was stunned once again. This was the first time he had heard the fat cat mention this power. So the power of a 9th level Chaos Beast was called the power of chaos. Yes. The fat cat nodded again and said, although the ghost the Archdor can replicate a martial artist, its ability is limited. There are many powers that the ghost the Archdor cannot replicate. Other than the 9th level Chaos Beast, the Star Essence Stone cannot replicate either. And when Nietian heard the fat cat's words, he could not help but frown and said, but mirror image Nietian has the Starry Sky / The Starry Sky / came from the Star Essence Stone. If mirror image Nietian did not have the Star Essence Stone in his body, then where did the Starry Sky / come from? It's the same principle. The fat cat smiled faintly and said, the Starry Sky / in mirror image's hands is just a sword that looks like the Starry Sky / Have you ever seen your mirror image use the power of stars? This no. Nietian suddenly understood, but then he frowned and said, that mirror image has used the power of gods and demons. Yes. The fat cat nodded and said, the power of gods and demons is real, but the power of stars and the power of chaos cannot be replicated by the ghost the Archdor. Nietian nodded silently and thought to himself, it seems like the power of stars and the power of chaos are more terrifying than the power of gods and demons. The ghost the Archdor could replicate the power of gods and demons, but could not replicate the power of stars and the power of chaos. This undoubtedly meant that the power of stars and the power of chaos were more terrifying than the power of gods and demons. Chapter 26:37. Chapter 26:37. Ghost Vein Bloodspring. Looks like the Ghost Emperor's door isn't that scary after all, Nietian said with a faint smile. Since the Ghost Emperor's door couldn't replicate the star and chaotic force, it meant that its ability was limited. Nietian, don't underestimate the Ghost Emperor's door. The fat cat said it can replicate the demon and god's force, even the Eye of Doomsday and the Xiantian Martial Vein. Isn't it scary? Nietian's expression stiffened. Then he nodded and said, the Ghost Emperor's door is really strange. So many martial artists were replicated just by walking through it. I really wonder what kind of existence the creator of the Ghost Emperor's door was. The demon and god's force was an ancient taboo force, yet the Ghost Emperor's door could replicate it. As for the star and chaotic force, the Ghost Emperor's door couldn't replicate them, not because it was weak, but because these two forces were too powerful. Nietian, do you still remember the Ghost Vein Bloodspring? At this moment, the fat cat suddenly thought of something. The corner of her mouth twitched slightly as she asked with a strange expression, Ghost Vein Bloodspring? Nietian was startled for a moment. Then he smiled and said, it's the Yuan Vein Killing Formation. The Ghost Vein Bloodspring was mentioned by the mirror image, so it was referring to the Yuan Vein Killing Formation. Speaking of the Yuan Vein Killing Formation, it was also very scary. Using the Yuan Vein as the formation eye and the bloodline as the formation runes, this kind of heaven-defying method was simply abnormal. Yes, the fat cat nodded heavily. Then she fell into deep thought and didn't speak for a long time. Fat, what are you thinking about? Nietian frowned and asked after seeing the fat cat's reaction. Nietian, I feel that we've overlooked something about the ghost vein blood spring. The fat cat said in a deep voice. The person who set up the formation used the yuan vein and bloodline to form the formation is indeed scary. The ghost vein blood spring is actually a trap to lure martial artists into it and absorb their bloodline power. Yes, Nie Tian nodded. Ouching was chosen by the ghost vein blood spring because of her nether ghost vein. She almost died after entering the ghost vein blood spring. As he spoke, Nie Tian frowned and asked curiously, I wonder how long the ghost vein blood spring has existed, and where did the bloodline power it absorbed go? That Yuan meridian. Suddenly, little fat cat seemed to have thought of something and cried out in shock. Nie Tian was taken aback. He looked at Fat Cat in surprise and asked, Fat, are you all right? Understood. I've finally figured it out. Fat Cat ignored Nie Tian. Instead, it yelled excitedly. At the same time, it could not hide the horror in its expression. Nie Tian saw that Fat Cat was behaving abnormally, and he could not help but be stunned. He did not know what the latter had discovered. The ghost vein blood spring. I finally understand what it means. After a while, the Fat Cat calmed down a lot, but its deep blue eyes were even more shocked. Fat, what did you discover? Nie Tian frowned and asked again. Nie Tian, I want to ask you, how many Yuan meridians does a martial artist have? The Fat Cat calmed down and suddenly asked Nie Tian. 9. Nie Tian was stunned, and his heart was even more puzzled. A martial artist had 9 Yuan meridians. This was the most basic knowledge. Of course, Nie Tian, who had 10 Yuan meridians, was an exception. 9 Yuan meridians, corresponding to the 9 Yuan meridian killing arrays. Little Fat Cat nodded its head, its lips curling into a strange smile as it said. Nie Tian's brows furrowed, but he soon realized something and exclaimed, Little Fei, are you saying that the person who set up the primal vein killing formation didn't only have 1, but 9? Yes. The Fat Cat nodded and said, If I could pull out Yuan meridians to form the killing arrays, why would I only pull out 1 Yuan meridian? That's true. Nie Tian nodded slightly and said, But isn't the person who pulled out the Yuan meridian courting death by doing this? A martial artist who had their Yuan meridian removed would definitely not be able to survive. This person had used Yuan meridians and blood meridians to form the arrays. This action was indeed suspicious. I guess that this person would not be able to live, so before he died, he used 9 Yuan meridian to form 9 Yuan meridian killing arrays. In other words, 9 ghost vein blood springs. The Fat Cat smiled strangely and asked, Nie Tian, do you know why the Yuan meridian killing arrays are called ghost vein blood springs? Nie Tian went blank for a moment before shaking his head. I don't know, because the person who laid the Yuan meridian killing arrays was the Ghost Emperor. The Fat Cat said in a deep voice, with a complicated look in its eyes. Ghost Emperor. Nie Tian was surprised and immediately thought of something. He said in shock, Could it be the Ghost Emperor that the mirror image mentioned? Yes. The Fat Cat nodded and said, You must remember that after you destroyed the ghost vein blood springs, the mirror image was very angry and said that you ruined the Ghost Emperor's plan. So I think that the 9 ghost vein blood springs and the 9 Ghost Emperor gates were created by this Ghost Emperor. This. Nie Tian was stunned when he heard what the Fat Cat said and was speechless for a long time. He really could not imagine how terrifying this Ghost Emperor was. The Ghost Emperor gates and the ghost vein blood springs were all heaven-defying things. What was the Ghost Emperor trying to do by creating these things? What could the Ghost Emperor's plan be? After a while, Nie Tian said in a deep voice with a face full of shock. In fact, when he heard the mirror images talking about the Ghost Emperor's plan, he did not pay much attention to it. But now, he had to pay attention to this matter. Nie Tian, since the mirror image mentioned the Ghost Emperor's plan, does this mean that the Ghost Emperor is still alive? At this time, the Fat Cat frowned and said with a shocked expression, No, that's impossible. Nie Tian was stunned and his voice was trembling. Since the Ghost Emperor could create things like the Ghost Emperor gates and the Ghost Emperor blood springs, it was hard to imagine how strong he was. If such a person was still alive, wouldn't he be an unbeatable existence? I think it's very likely that the Ghost Emperor is still alive. The fat cat's eyes narrowed and said, "Maybe the ghost emperor is in a weak state and the 9 ghost vein blood springs are what keep him alive." The power absorbed by the ghost vein blood springs was actually absorbed by the ghost emperor. This! Nyetian was stunned, and his face was a little stiff. Nyetian, hurry up and restore your strength. We have to return to the original valley later. I want to sense the ghost vein blood springs again. The fat cat's eyes flickered and said, "Okay." Nyetian nodded slightly, and no longer said anything and directly entered the state of cultivation. Nyetian and the others stayed in the canyon for 3 days before they completely recovered. At this time, June Ouching had already woken up, but her body was still very weak. "Ouching, how do you feel?" Nyetian looked at June Ouching with some worry and asked with concern. "I'm fine, just a little weak." June Ouching nodded and smiled. She didn't want Nyetian to worry about her. "Don't worry, June girl is fine. She will recover after resting for a while." At this time, the fat cat's voice sounded and urged Nyetian, "Let's hurry back to the original valley. I must find out about the ghost vein blood springs." "Okay." Nyetian nodded and was ready to leave the canyon. But at this time, he sensed that there was an aura outside the canyon, rushing over at an extremely fast speed. Chapter 2638. Chapter 2638. Chapter 2638. The remains of the ghost emperor. It's Yin Tianyi. Feng Qi also sensed the aura outside the canyon. He frowned and said solemnly, "The aura that suddenly appeared outside the canyon was none other than Yin Tianyi." Nyetian and the rest walked out of the canyon and saw a figure running wildly from afar. It was Yin Tianyi. "Nyetian, save me quickly." Yin Tianyi's figure ran wildly and suddenly saw Nyetian and the rest. He shouted anxiously as though he saw a life-saving straw. Nyetian frowned and saw that behind Yin Tianyi there were dozens of black shadows that were as fast as lightning. Those black shadows seemed to be some kind of bird. They weren't big in size, but their speed was very fast. In the blink of an eye, they were about to catch up to Yin Tianyi. At this time, if Nyetian and the rest didn't make a move, Yin Tianyi would definitely die. Without hesitation, Nyetian's figure moved directly. Starlight Heaven slash appeared in his hand. With a slash, dozens of sword shadows whizzed out. Bam! 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 Immediately, the sword shadows landed. A dull sound was heard in the air. Dozens of black shadows directly fell to the ground. Nyetian's figure landed immediately. He didn't look at Yin Tianyi, but stared at the black strange bird on the ground. That strange bird was a few meters long. It was black all over, and its mouth was very big. It looked very strange. Dozens of strange birds were hit by Nyetian's sword shadows. They actually didn't die. Instead, they struggled on the ground as though they wanted to eat people. "What is this? A big-mouth bird?" Feng Qi's figure came and looked at the strange bird on the ground. Nyetian shook his head. He also didn't know what this strange bird was. "Thank you for saving my life." Yin Tianyi was still in shock at the side and quickly thanked him. These 3 days he had suffered unspeakably. There were a few times when he almost lost his life. "Yin Tianyi, you ran pretty fast just now, didn't you?" Feng Qi glanced at Yin Tianyi and sneered. Yin Tianyi's face was ugly and he didn't speak. His strength had yet to recover, so he could only swallow his anger. Nyetian looked at the strange bird on the ground and frowned. He felt very strange. He sensed a familiar aura from the strange bird. It was a type of evil energy. It was the same evil energy that he had sensed in the mirror image Chaos Beast. It seemed that the strange bird also had that kind of evil energy in its body. Nyetian didn't think too much about it. He added another slash and killed dozens of strange birds. Then, Nyetian did not waste any time. He left immediately and headed back to the original valley. A moment later, everyone arrived at the original valley. But at this time, what they saw in front of them was only a pile of rubble after the collapse. What happened here? Yin Tianyi looked at the scene in front of him and asked with a face of horror. "Shut up." Feng Qi rolled his eyes at him and scolded him. Yin Tianyi was so frightened that he shrunk back and did not dare to speak again. Nyetian looked at the rubble in front of him. He couldn't sense any array formation power at all. He didn't know what the fat cat was going to do by coming back here. At this time, the fat cat's figure appeared. It flashed in the air and went directly to the top of the rubble. Then, from its body, it kept releasing the power of colored glaze. Threads of it flowed and surged in the air. Then, it seeped into the ground and then into the ground bit by bit. Nietion didn't know what the fat cat was doing. He stood far away and didn't dare to disturb it. It really is a Garfield, and it's a Garfield with 7 tails. Feng Chi looked at the fat cat's figure and couldn't help but smile and murmur. The fat cat's figure froze in midair and didn't move. It carefully sensed everything underground. Next, Nietion and the others waited at the side. After a few hours, the fat cat finally stopped moving. Its figure moved and directly returned to the origin fetus space. Fat, did you find anything? Nietion frowned and asked when he saw the fat cat's shocked expression. It seems that I have underestimated this ghost emperor. Little fat cat let out a long breath of turbid air, and after a long time said, "Such a shocking technique. It has truly opened my eyes." Nietion saw the fat cat's shocked expression and couldn't help but frown. He was even more curious about what the fat cat had found. Nietion, we don't have much time left. At this time, the fat cat said in a low voice. There was an unconcealable panic on its face. What do you mean? Nietion was stunned and couldn't help but feel nervous. I'm afraid the ghost emperor is coming back to life. The fat cat said in a low voice. Its dark blue eyes were trembling. The ghost emperor is coming back to life. Nietion was startled and his expression froze. He couldn't understand what the fat cat was saying. Nietion, there are indeed 9 ghost vein blood springs in the ghost emperor's tomb. The fat cat took a deep breath and began to explain. The 9 ghost vein blood springs are actually the ghost emperor's 9 energy veins. The purpose of the 9 ghost vein blood springs is to help the ghost emperor absorb the power of the bloodline and provide energy for his resurrection. As long as the ghost vein blood springs absorb enough bloodline power, the ghost emperor will be resurrected. Nietion stood rooted to the ground for a few seconds after hearing the little fat cat's words. Then he said, You're saying that the ghost emperor was already dead, but before he died, he used his 9 origin meridians to create 9 ghost vein blood springs, and then used the ghost vein blood springs to absorb the bloodline power to resurrect himself. The fat cat nodded and said, However, that's not all the ghost emperor did. Not only did he create 9 energy veins in a 9 ghost vein blood springs, but he also merged his entire body with the heavens and earth to form a huge formation. Merging his body with the heavens and earth to form a huge formation. Nietion frowned as his expression stiffened. The astonishment in his heart was indescribable. It was already unbelievable for 9 energy veins to form a formation, but it was even more unbelievable for the body to form a huge formation. Who exactly was this ghost emperor to have such a heaven-defying method? Yeah, little fat cat naturally understood Nietion's shock. Even he was shocked. Taking a deep breath, little fat cat continued. Before the ghost emperor died, he refined his body into a formation and fused it with the entire ghost emperor's tomb, turning the entire tomb into a part of the ghost emperor's formation. Such a method is truly amazing. I'm sure that the ghost emperor was a sage-level formation master when he was alive. The 9 ghost vein blood springs are actually his 9 energy veins, which are also the 9 formation cores of the ghost emperor formation. The purpose of the 9 ghost vein blood springs is to absorb enough bloodline power. As long as the bloodline power is sufficient, the ghost emperor will be resurrected. Nietion was stunned after hearing the fat cat's words. He stood rooted to the spot, unable to speak for a long time. Everything that little fat cat had said was just too shocking, and it was almost beyond his comprehension. How strong must a person be to be able to form a huge formation with their body, merging with the power of the heavens and earth, and bring everything within 10,000 li into the formation? How heaven-defying must the ghost emperor have been when he was alive? Chapter 2639. Creepy Mummy Nietion understood everything. His expression was very ugly, but he was still able to maintain his composure. If it wasn't for what the fat cat had said, he absolutely wouldn't have thought that the entire Ghost Emperor's tomb was actually a great array, and this great array was the Ghost Emperor's martial body. It was no exaggeration to say that Nietian and the others were currently inside the Ghost Emperor's body. Nietian, are you okay? At this time, Feng Qi walked over. Seeing Nietian's shocked expression, he couldn't help but frown and ask, "Did that seven-tailed Garfield say something to you? Why are you sweating?" "Nietian, did something happen?" Jun Ouching was also puzzled. She frowned and asked. Nietian was a person with a firm heart. Normal things wouldn't make him so shocked. Nietian took a deep breath, thought for a moment, and then told him about the Ghost Emperor's tomb. After hearing what Nietian said, everyone was stunned and speechless for a long time. What Nietian said was too shocking, beyond everyone's imagination. After a long time, everyone calmed down, but their eyes were still filled with shock. "Nietian, you have already destroyed a ghost vein blood spring. Does this mean that the Ghost Emperor cannot be revived?" Feng Qi's eyes trembled slightly as he looked at Nietian and asked. Nietian narrowed his eyes and shook his head. He also didn't know if the Ghost Emperor could be resurrected. At this moment, the figure of the fat cat appeared and said in a low voice, "It won't. The Ghost Emperor's tomb has existed for so long. Even if we destroy a ghost vein blood spring, it won't be able to stop the Ghost Emperor from reviving." When Feng Qi saw the fat cat appear, he was stunned at first, but then he asked very seriously, "Mr. Garfield, then how do we stop the Ghost Emperor from reviving?" "What, Mr. Garfield?" The fat cat glared at Feng Qi and said, "This noble one is the nine-tailed chinchilla." "Then Mr. Chinchilla." Feng Qi laughed and corrected himself. The fat cat rolled its eyes at Feng Qi. Then its expression became serious and said, "If we can destroy the ghost vein blood springs, we might be able to stop the Ghost Emperor from reviving. Destroy the 9 ghost vein blood springs." Hearing the little fat cat's words, Nietian's face froze, not knowing what to say. Destroying the Ghost Emperor. 9 ghost vein blood springs, calm. Furthermore, they did not know where the other 8 ghost vein blood springs were. With your current strength, wanting to destroy the 9 ghost vein blood springs is impossible. The little fat cat swept its gaze over the crowd and said without hesitation, "Nietian and the others being able to destroy 1 ghost vein blood spring was already a miracle. It was impossible for them to destroy the other 8 ghost vein blood springs. Then what should we do?" Nietian calmed down a little and asked with an embarrassed expression, "Wait." The fat cat helplessly shook its head and said, "Outside the Ghost Emperor Valley, there are still many experts. After they enter the Ghost Emperor's tomb, we will think of a way to destroy the ghost vein blood springs." "That's the only way." Nietian nodded helplessly. The fat cat didn't say anything else. Its figure flashed and returned to the origin embryo space. "Nietian, you must stop the cultivators in the tomb from killing each other. As long as a cultivator dies, their power will be absorbed by the Ghost Emperor's tomb. This will speed up the Ghost Emperor's resurrection." The fat cat reminded Nietian after returning to the origin embryo space. Nietian nodded heavily. "Nietan, those experts will enter the tomb in 10 days. What should we do next?" Feng Qi looked at Nietian and asked with a worried expression. "We will go to the place where the cultivators are gathering now." Nietian nodded. He wanted to stop the cultivators from killing each other because the death of any cultivator meant that the Ghost Emperor's resurrection would be sped up by 1 step. Cold Tooth Valley. Feng Qi's eyes narrowed as he said, "The next destination." The group didn't stop and headed straight for Cold Tooth Valley. It wasn't long before they arrived at the outskirts of the Cold Tooth Valley. At this moment, Nietian suddenly felt something. His eyes narrowed and his expression changed. One evil aura. Feng Qi also felt something unusual. His eyes trembled as he growled in a deep voice. "Everyone be careful." Nietian frowned and became very cautious. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Just as he finished speaking, a whistling sound suddenly came from the distance. In the air, there was a gloomy aura, which turned out to be dark yellow yin qi. In the blink of an eye, dozens of balls of dark yellow inchi arrived and surrounded Nyetian and the rest. "What is this?" Huang Fuhong frowned and asked with a strange expression. The dark yellow inchi had an evil aura. It circulated in the air and made people feel very uncomfortable. Hua! At this moment, the ball of inchi suddenly shook and condensed into a body. It was a dried corpse. Roar! After the dried corpse appeared, it let out a muffled roar, as if it was showing off to Nyetian and the rest. Then, more inchi condensed into dried corpses. They were extremely ferocious. They bared their fangs and brandished their claws, as if they were going to tear everything in front of them into pieces. What the hell? Feng Qi let out a strange cry. He took a step forward and swept out his spear. Boom! The spear was like a dragon. It swept out violently, and the ground was lifted. With a loud bang, it pressed down on the dried corpses. In the next moment, the dried corpses moved at the same time. They dashed forward fearlessly. Bang! Then, the spear in the air was shattered. However, the dried corpses were not injured. Instead, they rushed forward like wild beasts. Wah! The dried corpse in the front waved its hands. A sharp blade appeared in the air. It flashed with a cold light and attacked Feng Qi fiercely. Be careful! Nyetian saw this and stepped forward. He pulled Feng Qi back dozens of meters and dodged the cold light. What a strong dried corpse! Feng Qi stabilized himself and was extremely shocked. His spear was strong enough to split mountains. However, when it hit the dried corpse, there was no reaction at all. It was evident that the dried corpses were extremely strong. They were definitely comparable to rank 9 divine beasts. These dried corpses are strange. Don't fight recklessly. Nyetian's eyes darkened. Then, he moved and rushed up to the sky. When the others saw this, they followed suit and jumped up to the sky. However, the dried corpses had no intention of stopping. They leaped into the sky and chased after them. Damn it! Nyetian frowned and growled. Then he slashed down with his sword. The sky was filled with sword shadows, and they rushed toward the dried corpses. However, the dried corpses were not afraid at all. Instead, they rushed over even more fiercely. Bang, bang, bang. Wherever the dried corpses passed, the sword shadows were shattered and turned into sword essence, dissipating in the air. This scene flabbergasted Nyetian and the others. Chapter 2640. Dark red river standing high in the air. Nyetian sensed the frigid aura and couldn't help but frown. Such a fierce aura. He could sense that the seemingly weak and inconspicuous cold rays were extremely sharp. They were not weaker than the attack of a half-step peak martial artist. Let's see what these dried corpses are. In the next moment, Nyetian's eyes grew grim, and he blurred into action, diving down from the sky. A layer of white light shone from his body as he activated the heavenly light armor. Bang, bang, bang. Several streaks of cold light flew past him and made contact with the bright yang battle armor. They actually left holes in the armor, and even wounds appeared on Nyetian's body. Nyetian! Upon seeing this, June ouching exclaimed, her face turning pale with fright. However, Nyetian ignored her and dashed forward. In the blink of an eye, he arrived beside one of the mummies. He stretched out his hand and grabbed the mummy's neck like a pair of iron pincers. Crack! Without hesitation, Nyetian exerted force in his hand and broke the mummy's neck. Boom! The mummy in his hand turned into a ball of inchi and dissipated in the air. Feng Qi and the rest were delighted when they saw this. Nyetian was so fierce that he broke the mummy's neck. However, at this moment, dozens of mummies had arrived high up in the sky. They were emitting a murderous aura and looked ferocious. The weakness of the mummies is their neck. Nyetian shouted at the crowd. Feng Qi and the others finally realized what was going on. They immediately moved and aimed at the mummy's neck. Bang, bang, bang. A series of muffled sounds came from the sky. Dozens of mummies turned into inchi and dissipated in the blink of an eye. After dealing with all the dried corpses, everyone finally heaved a sigh of relief. June Ouching moved and arrived beside Nyetian. When she saw the wounds on his body, she asked anxiously, Tian, are you all right? I'm fine. Tian smiled faintly, but his heart was not at ease. He had been scratched by the mummy, and the wound seemed to have seeped into some kind of demonic power. It actually didn't heal even after a long time. Tian, how did you know that the weakness of the mummy is its neck? At this moment, Fengqi arrived and asked curiously. Tian explained to Fengqi in a deep voice, I can sense that there is evil energy in these mummies, and all of the evil energy is gathered at their necks. Therefore, I suspect that the weakness of the mummies is their necks, where the evil energy gathers. I see. Fengqi nodded, marveling at Tian's observational skills. Actually, he had also sensed the evil energy in the mummies, but he didn't think much about it. For Tian to be able to make such an accurate judgment in such a short time, he was indeed very powerful. However, at this moment, Tian's expression was not relaxed. His eyes were surging with deep worry. He had already sensed the evil energy in the mummies 3 times. The first time was on the mirror image 9 extreme chaos beast, the second time was on the strange blackbird, and the third time was on these mummies. This kind of evil energy was too strange, and he couldn't help but worry. He had a bold guess. The evil energy was very likely the Ghost Emperor's own power. But now, he had no way to prove it. Given the current situation, he could only take it one step at a time. Following that, Tian didn't waste any time and headed straight for the Frosttooth Valley. The group arrived outside the Frosttooth Valley. Tian was very careful. He didn't enter directly. Instead, he used his divine senses to sense the surroundings. He couldn't help but frown. With a strange expression, he murmured, Why isn't there any aura in the entire valley? Could everyone have left? Fengqi also sensed this. He paused for a moment and said, There were many martial artists gathered in the valley just now. Tian felt strange. After thinking for a while, he said to the others, You guys wait here first. I'll go in and take a look. Tian, you have to be careful. Jun Aoqing looked at Tian, her pretty face filled with worry. Tian nodded slightly and then entered the Frosttooth Valley. The moment he entered the valley, he felt an icy chill hit him in the face. At the same time, there was a thick smell of blood in the air. It was as if many people had just died in the valley. Tian took one step at a time carefully. He cautiously sensed his surroundings, but he realized that there was nothing around him. It was empty. Apart from the chill and the smell of blood, the entire valley was like a huge grave. It was eerily silent. What's going on? Tian was confused. He didn't dare to go too deep into the valley. After thinking for a while, he prepared to go back. But right at this moment, he suddenly sensed a strange aura. His face sank, and his figure moved, charging forward. A moment later, a dark red river appeared in front of him. The river was dark red, as if fresh blood was flowing down it. At the same time, the river water was emitting a thick smell of blood. Tian, go into the river and take a look. At that moment, Fat Cat seemed to have sensed something and suddenly shouted. Tian's eyes focused slightly. He then nodded and prepared to enter the dark red river. Bang! However, at that moment, the sky above suddenly trembled and the entire valley shook violently. The sudden change caused Tian's expression to stiffen. Leave quickly. In the next moment, Fat Cat's voice was heard once again. This time, it was filled with panic. Tian didn't hesitate. A pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back, and his figure turned into a streak of light as he dashed forward. However, just as he flew a few hundred meters away, he suddenly felt the space around him become heavy, as if there was an invisible force suppressing him, making it difficult for him to move an inch. Shit! Tian's expression changed as he cursed in his heart. Bang! At that moment, in the sky above the valley, a giant blood-colored hand appeared. It floated in the air like a blood-colored curtain, covering the entire valley. It's that giant blood-colored hand again. Tian raised his head and saw the giant blood-colored hand. His eyes were filled with unconcealable panic. At that moment, he wanted to leave the valley, but the pressure in the air made it difficult for him to move an inch. The terrifying pressure felt like it was coming at him from all directions. It was extremely strange, and yet Tian almost couldn't bear it. He endured the pressure and walked forward step by step with great difficulty. Every step he took seemed to be extremely heavy, leaving deep footprints on the ground. Little brat with the celestial devil embryo, you won't be able to escape. Right at this moment, an extremely deep voice suddenly rang out from the void. It seemed to have come from the void itself, and it resounded in every corner of the valley. It was an extremely strange sound. "Who's there?" Niet Tian exclaimed, as his eyes flickered. "The Emperor!" The next moment, the deep voice was heard once again, as a blood-colored vortex appeared in the sky. Chapter 26:41. The Ghost Emperor's solar blood-colored vortex appeared in midair above the Windtooth Valley. A figure shrouded in a murderous aura slowly walked out from the blood-colored vortex. Niet Tian's eyes narrowed, unable to conceal the astonishment on his face. Even though he had a firm heart, he couldn't help but panic when he saw this strange scene. The murderous figure took one step at a time toward Niet Tian. With every step he took, Niet Tian could feel the pressure in the void increase slightly. When a murderous figure landed on the ground, Niet Tian felt like all the bones in his body were about to be crushed, as if his body was about to be torn apart at any moment. "Who the hell are you?" Niet Tian struggled to open his mouth and ask, his face flushed red. "Brat with the demon god Yuan Meridians, you destroyed my ghost meridian blood spring, yet you don't know who I am?" The murderous figure said in a deep voice. The murderous aura surrounding him was extremely intense, circulating in the void. Even his space seemed to be trembling from the pressure. You're the Ghost Emperor." Niet Tian was stunned for a moment, before he blurted out in shock. His eyes widened. He never expected that the person standing before him would be the Ghost Emperor. The Ghost Emperor, the creator of the Ghost Emperor's tomb, had actually appeared. "Brat, you're indeed a smart person," the Ghost Emperor said in a deep voice. His lips curled into a strange arc as he said indifferently, "To be able to destroy my ghost meridian blood spring, you're indeed not a simple character." As he spoke, the Ghost Emperor had already arrived before Niet Tian, standing only a few meters away from him. At such a close distance, Niet Tian could feel the pressure in his body reaching its limit. He could even hear the sound of his bones cracking. "Brat, do you feel the pressure?" The Ghost Emperor said in a deep voice, "You destroyed my ghost meridian blood spring, so I can kill you now." Niet Tian stared at the Ghost Emperor without the slightest hint of fear in his eyes. He still refused to yield to an enemy he couldn't resist. "However, this Emperor will not kill you right now." In the next moment, the Ghost Emperor smiled sinisterly and said, "You have the God-fiend origin embryo. If I absorb the power of your bloodline, I can definitely revive. However, the things that this Emperor desires are even more than that. There's an even more terrifying power in your body than the God-fiend nascent embryo. Not only do I want your fiend god nascent embryo, but I also want your sacred world foundation stone." When Niet Tian heard the Ghost Emperor mention the sacred world cornerstone, his eyes couldn't help but tremble. It turned out that the Ghost Emperor had already seen through the star origin stone in his body. If I'm not wrong, the sacred world foundation stone in your body should be the legendary star origin stone. The Ghost Emperor's eyes flickered with a scorching light. He continued, "I've never seen a person fuse the foundation stones of the Saint's world so perfectly. If I were to kill you now, I would only be able to obtain the power of your bloodline. As for the stellar origin stone in your body, it would automatically disappear into the space-time and search for its next suitable owner. For the sake of the astral origin stones, this Emperor shall let you live a little longer." As he said that, the Ghost Emperor's eyes flickered with a sinister light. He didn't even care about Niet Tian. All he saw was the God-fiend essence embryo and the stellar origin stone. In his opinion, Niet Tian was just a useless piece of trash. For such a person to fuse with the stellar origin stone was simply an insult to the stellar origin stone. Niet Tian's face darkened, and the anger in his eyes surged. Although he couldn't speak, he knew that the stellar origin stone definitely couldn't fall into the Ghost Emperor's hands. Ah, that's right. There's still the ninth level chaos beast in your body. At that moment, the Ghost Emperor's eyes flickered as he said, "However, I guess you still don't know what the ninth level chaos beast is. You'll probably alarm some uninvited guests if you use the ninth level chaos beast. If those people find you, you're dead meat. Rather than letting those people take advantage of you, why don't you hand the ninth level chaos beast over to me?" As he said that, the Ghost Emperor's eyes burned with passion, as though he had already obtained the ninth level chaos beast. "I'd rather die than let you obtain the Stellar Origin Stone and the ninth level chaos beast," Nietian suddenly said as blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. "Kid, that's not up to you." The Ghost Emperor laughed coldly. "From a moment you stepped into the Ghost Emperor's remains, you were destined to become a stepping stone on my path to resurrection. You should feel very honored. Among all the stepping stones, you're the biggest one." Nietian's eyes darkened as flames of rage surged in his eyes. He didn't enter the Ghost Emperor's remains to be someone's stepping stone. "Kid, the dark red river you saw just now is called the Ghost Emperor's heart." The Ghost Emperor spoke again. "Remember, if you want to leave the Ghost Emperor's remains, you have to destroy the Ghost Emperor's heart. I will be waiting for you in the Ghost Emperor's heart. I hope you won't disappoint me." Ha ha! As soon as he finished speaking, the Ghost Emperor's figure suddenly disappeared, leaving only his maniacal laughter echoing throughout the space. At the same time, the giant blood-red hand high up in the sky suddenly disappeared. In the blink of an eye, Nietian felt the pressure around him disappear. Phew! As the pressure disappeared, Nietian let out a sigh of relief. His tensed face only relaxed after a long time. He moved slightly and felt as though all the bones in his body had been shattered. An excruciating pain surged through his entire body. "Nietian, don't panic. Let's recover first," the fat cat said nervously. Nietian nodded and quickly sat down cross-legged to recover. A moment later, he felt his body recovering significantly, so he stood up. "Fat, was the person that appeared just now really the Ghost Emperor?" Nietian asked in a shaken voice as he recalled what had just happened. The fat cat nodded and said, "To be more precise, it should be a wisp of the Ghost Emperor's divine soul." Nietian's eyes darkened as he fell silent. He had also guessed that the figure just now could only be the remnant of the Ghost Emperor's divine soul. It seemed like only the Ghost Emperor's physical body had perished, but his divine soul was still present. "Fat, is what the Ghost Emperor said true?" Nietian frowned and continued to ask. "I'm not sure." The fat cat shook her head and said, "The Ghost Emperor didn't kill you not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't have the ability to. He's only a wisp of his divine soul, so he can't unleash his power. He could only rely on the giant blood-colored hand in the sky to exert pressure on you. When he walks in front of you, it should be the greatest pressure. If he still can't kill you, it means that he doesn't have the strength to kill you." The corner of Nietian's mouth twitched slightly as he nodded. Chapter 2642. An expert has arrived, and he asked, "The Ghost Emperor said that the dark red river was the Ghost Emperor's heart. If we want to leave the Ghost Emperor's legacy, we'll have to destroy the Ghost Emperor's heart. Is that true?" "It should be." Little Fat Cat nodded and said, "This exalted one sensed it earlier. The Ghost Emperor's heart is the core of the entire Ghost Emperor's tomb. The 9 ghost vein blood springs converge at the Ghost Emperor's heart. The 9 blood springs are the 9 origin veins of the Ghost Emperor, and the heart is where his heart is located. As long as we can destroy the heart, we can destroy the entire formation, and the Ghost Emperor won't be able to resurrect." Nietian couldn't help but smile at the little fat cat's words. He said, "It seems like the Ghost Emperor wants me to enter the Ghost Emperor's heart." "Yes." The fat cat nodded. "The heart is definitely more dangerous than the blood springs. The Ghost Emperor wants you to enter because he wants you to die inside." Nietian's expression was gloomy. He naturally understood that the Ghost Emperor lured him into the heart to set up a trap for him. However, if he didn't destroy the heart, they would be trapped inside the tomb forever. This wasn't what he wanted. Moreover, if he didn't destroy the heart, the Ghost Emperor would resurrect one day. "Nietian, do you want to go to the Ghost Emperor's heart?" The little fat cat asked in a deep voice. Tian nodded. A strange smile appeared at the corner of his mouth as he said in a deep voice, "Since the Ghost Emperor wants me to enter the Ghost Emperor's heart so much, wouldn't I disappoint him if I didn't?" "All right." The fat cat didn't oppose Tian's decision. Instead, she became very excited. "I'm guessing that the Ghost Emperor wants you to open the Sacred World Gate is also inside the heart." A smile appeared at the corner of Tian's mouth as he said, "All the more reason to go." Then, Tian completely calmed down. Of course, he would not enter the Ghost Emperor's heart immediately. Instead, he would wait for the experts outside the Ghost Emperor Valley to enter. The restrictions on the 9 Ghost Emperor gates would weaken after 10 days. That would be the time for the various experts to enter. Subsequently, Tian allowed Jun Aoqing and the rest to enter the Hanya Valley and waited for the experts to arrive. The Ghost Emperor's soul had already appeared, so the Frostfang Valley was temporarily safe. Next, Tian and the others waited in the Windtooth Valley. In the blink of an eye, 10 days had passed. Tian and the others had completely recovered. Looking at the time, it's about time for the people outside to come in. Tian stood up and muttered, "I wonder how many experts will enter this time." Feng Qi nodded, his eyes filled with anticipation. A moment later, there was a slight tremor in the sky as dozens of figures appeared in the void. "They're here." Feng Qi looked at the sky and shouted in surprise. Tian nodded slightly. He had already seen several familiar figures: Soaring Cloud Sword Sage, Yin Lingyun, Selfless Sword Demon Qin Xiuan, Ice Tower Master Huangfu Changsheng, and even old ancestor Nine Bones and thousands of babies were here. Apart from these people, there were also experts from various sections. However, Tian's eyes were locked on 2 figures at this moment: the Corpse Lord and the Ghost King. The Corpse Lord and the Ghost King stood side by side, but at the same time, there was a large distance between them, as if they were afraid of each other. Tian was a little puzzled. Why did these experts appear at the same time? The way they entered the Ghost Emperor tomb is different from yours. They directly went through the powerful restrictions of the Ghost Emperor's gate and entered the Ghost Emperor's gate together. That's why they came to the core of the Ghost Emperor's tomb together. Little Fat Cat understood Tian's doubts and said with a faint smile. Tian nodded, understanding. The figures in the void moved at the same time and landed in the Windtooth Valley. After the group of experts landed, they couldn't help but have strange expressions when they saw Tian and the others. Yin Lingyun saw Feng Qi, and Huangfu Changsheng saw Huangfu Hong, and they were very happy. Tian, why are there only a few of you? Where are the others? The Ghost King walked over and directly came to Tian's side, asking with a gloomy gaze. Clearly, he thought that everyone who entered the Ghost Emperor tomb had arrived in the Windtooth Valley. I don't know. Tian shook his head and didn't say anything else. He didn't know where the others were. Have you found it? The Ghost King didn't ask any more questions. He didn't care about the lives of those people, so he directly transmitted his voice to Tian. Of course, Tian knew that the Ghost King was asking him if he had found the gate of the sacred world. However, he felt that the most important thing right now wasn't the gate of the sacred world, but the Ghost Emperor. Lord Ghost King, don't be anxious. I have something to tell everyone about the Ghost Emperor tomb. Tian glanced at the Ghost Emperor and nodded slightly. What is it? The Ghost King's gaze sank. He was obviously unhappy. Tian didn't care about the Ghost King. He took a step forward and said in a loud voice, "Everyone, please be quiet. I have something to tell everyone." When the group of experts heard Tian's words, they immediately turned to look at him. However, their eyes were filled with disdain and disdain. Among these experts, the weakest was a peak divine state expert. Most of them were half-saints or even stronger. Moreover, their status was either a sect leader or a peak expert. In their eyes, Tian was just an insignificant minion that wasn't even worth mentioning. They didn't even have the interest to spare him a second glance. Of course, no one was willing to listen to Tian's words. Tian couldn't help but frown when he saw the reaction of the crowd. He wanted to tell them about the Ghost Emperor, because he needed the help of these experts to enter the Ghost Emperor's heart. Brat, why don't you take a piss and look at yourself? Who do you think you are? Among the people here, which one of them isn't 100 or 1,000 times stronger than you? Since when was it your turn to speak here? The person who spoke was the 100 Rivers Divine Sect's great elder Zhudajiang. His face was filled with disdain, and his words were extremely sharp. "Humph, you immature brat. You don't even have the right to speak in front of us." Another expert sneered and said in a cold tone, "Let's go. Since we are already here, we don't have time to listen to your nonsense." Many experts started to leave after saying that. According to the rumors, there were many powerful inheritances in the Ghost Emperor tomb. Since they were already here, they had to make the best use of their time to search for them. They didn't have time to listen to Nie Tian's nonsense. The crowd turned around and prepared to leave the Hanya Valley. Nie Tian frowned his eyebrows and turned around to look at the Ghost Emperor. If the Ghost Emperor were to speak now, he might be able to make these people stay. However, the Ghost Emperor's eyes were cold, completely ignoring Nie Tian. Nie Tian wore a helpless expression. These people had no idea how important what he was about to say was. Who dares to leave? At that instant, a deep roar was heard all of a sudden. Chapter 26:43. A formation stir a deep and powerful voice resounded in the valley, with a strong, threatening aura. Everyone froze and looked over. Their eyes trembled and their faces stiffened. The person standing beside Nie Tian was the Corpse King of the Ghoul 13 Coffins. Lord Corpse Monarch. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment and looked at the Corpse Monarch in surprise. He did not expect that the Corpse King would appear at this time to speak up for him and shock the crowd. "What do you have to say? Say it." The Corpse King's reaction was very calm and said coldly. Nie Tian nodded slightly, raised his voice, and said in a clear voice, "Yes." He explained the situation of the Ghost Emperor's tomb in detail, so that everyone could understand how dangerous the situation they were currently in. However, as soon as he finished speaking, the entire place fell into dead silence. Everyone stared blankly at Nie Tian, as if they were looking at a fool. Obviously, they did not believe Nie Tian's words at all. "You don't believe me?" Nie Tian was stunned and asked. The next moment, there was an uproar. "Ha ha, this kid really knows how to tell a story." He even brought up the resurrection of the Ghost Emperor, using his body to form a formation and become the Ghost Emperor's tomb. Is this kid talking in his sleep? Is there really such a great formation in this world? That's nonsense. It's a miracle that this guy could survive in the Ghost Emperor's tomb for so long. Everyone laughed, completely treating Nie Tian's words as a story and treating Nie Tian as an idiot. Indeed, what Nie Tian had said was so unbelievable that it was hard for anyone to believe it. Especially with his identity and strength, it was even less convincing. Feng Qi and the others believed Nie Tian because they had seen the ghost vein blood spring and the giant blood-colored hand with their own eyes. Nie Tian's face froze when he saw everyone's reaction. He didn't expect such a situation to happen at all. And at this time, the way the Corpse Lord and the Ghost King looked at Nie Tian was obviously different. It became very strange, or more accurately, very shocked. Both of them knew that what Nie Tian said was true. It was just that they did not expect that Nie Tian could actually pry into the Ghost Emperor remains' greatest secret in just half a month's time after entering it. Everyone quieted down. Just as the crowd was roaring with laughter, another voice rang out. It was Yin Lingyun who stood out. Seeing Yin Lingyun take the initiative to step forward, Nie Tian's gaze involuntarily trembled, feeling very happy. When everyone saw that it was Yin Lingyun, they immediately quietened down. "Master Mu, do you think that what Nie Tian said is true?" Yin Lingyun did not ask Nie Tian at this time. Instead, he came in front of a green-robed old man, bowed slightly, and asked respectfully. Nie Tian saw Yin Lingyun's action and could not help but frown. He thought to himself, "Who is this old man? He can actually make Sword Sage Lingyun bow." Yin Lingyun was definitely a peak powerhouse in the frozen ruins, but he was so respectful to the green-robed old man. It was enough to show that the green-robed old man's status was extraordinary. He is called Mu Shuizheng, an array master of the Myriad Domains Guild. I heard that he is a half-sage array master. Feng Qi came to Nie Tian's side and secretly transmitted his voice. Nye Tian's gaze froze slightly, and the corner of his mouth curled into a smile. Since it was a half-sage array master, you should believe his words. He is Mr. Shuai-Jing. At this time, someone recognized Mu Shuai-Jing and exclaimed, clearly very surprised. Mu Shuai-Jing was very famous in the Frozen Ruins. He was known as the #1 array master in the Frozen Ruins. Previously, no one had noticed that even this famous person had come to the Ghost Emperor's tomb. It's great that Mr. Shuai-Jing is here. Whether that kid was making up a story or not, Mr. Shuai-Jing will definitely be able to tell at a glance. Everyone was very excited, and all their gazes were focused on Mu Shuai-Jing. Nye Tian also looked at Mu Shuai-Jing, waiting for the latter to speak. Mu Shuai-Jing nodded slightly and walked forward step by step. He walked to the center of the crowd. Although his eyes were full of wrinkles, they were very bright and looked very elegant. He was not in a hurry to speak. Instead, his gaze swept across everyone and finally locked onto Nye Tian. Nye Tian was stared at by Mu Shuai-Jing. He could not help but feel the coldness and disdain in the latter's eyes. Young man, you're not a divine array master, right? After trembling for a long time, Mu Shuai-Jing finally opened his mouth and asked slowly. Nye Tian nodded and answered honestly, no, I didn't. He was once a spiritual array master, but not a divine array master. Spiritual array master and divine array master were only one word apart, but the difference was like heaven and earth. It was a qualitative leap from spiritual array master to divine array master, just like advancing to the deity realm after the heavenly emperor realm. Before Nye Tian reached the heavenly emperor realm, his array Dao and alchemy Dao were pretty good. But after advancing to the deity realm, he only pursued the martial Dao wholeheartedly and gave up on other cultivation. Humph, 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 humph. Mu Shuai-Jing looked at Nye Tian and sneered a few times. His eyes harbored malicious intentions. Finally, he said in a deep voice, young man, you are not even a divine array master. How did you see that the entire Ghost Emperor's tomb is a grand array? Pardon I for being blunt, but I did not sense any aura of an array formation in this space. So I concluded that what you said about using the Yuan meridian and bloodline to form an array, or even using your body to form an array, are all nonsense. Finishing, Mu Shuai-Jing flicked his sleeves, his face full of arrogance. Nye Tian was suddenly taken aback, simply not daring to believe his own ears. Mu Shuai-Jing put on airs here for a long time, trembling for a long time, and finally actually came to a conclusion that was nonsense. If he did not believe Nye Tian, just say it directly. Was there a need to waste such a long time? Ha ha, this boy is indeed bluffing people. In front of the #1 array formation master, fabricating this kind of nonsensical stuff, to think that he can think of it. Luckily, Mr. Shuai-Jing is here today. Otherwise, we'd really be fooled by him. Everyone roared with laughter. Their gazes when looking at Nye Tian were even colder and more mocking. Nye Tian's brows furrowed, his eyes incomparably gloomy. Originally, he was still hoping that Mu Shuai-Jing's appearance could make everyone believe his words. Who could have thought that after this old man's words, it made everyone utterly not believe him? Yan Lingyun watched by the side. His expression was also very ugly. He very much wanted to believe Nye Tian, but Mu Shuai-Jing was a half-sage level divine array master. His words clearly had more prestige than Nye Tian's. Lingyun, let's go. Mu Shuai-Jing did not wish to waste any more time. He said lightly and turned to leave. Ha ha ha. But right at this time, Nye Tian suddenly laughed coldly. His laughter was very strange. Boy, what are you laughing at? Mu Shuai-Jing's figure froze. He turned to look at Nye Tian and asked with a gloomy face. I'm laughing at you. Nye Tian's face darkened. He directly pointed at Mu Shuai-Jing and said, laughing at I? Mu Shuai-Jing was stunned for a moment. He seemed to suspect that his ears were playing tricks on him. You're so ridiculous. Shouldn't I laugh? Nye Tianling laughed coldly and said indifferently, so the dignified #1 array formation master is just an empty title. Completely bullsh *T. I think you should be called #1 bullsh *T master. His voice was not loud, but every sentence and every word sounded like thunder from the nine heavens, reverberating in everyone's ears. Mu Shuijing was the #1 array formation master in the Frozen Ruins. He was a member of the Myriad Domain Guild. Even the sect masters of the 7 major sects had to be courteous and respectful when they saw Mu Shuijing. They did not dare to be disrespectful in the slightest. At this time, Nietian directly called Mu Shuijing a Bulsh Astris team master in front of a group of experts. This was simply too crazy. Chapter 2644. Chapter 2644. Chapter 2644. Feng family forces. Mu Shuijing's body trembled, and he could no longer suppress the anger in his eyes. He was the #1 formation grandmaster in the Frozen Remains. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was extremely honorable. Everyone in the Frozen Remains had to be respectful in front of him, and they did not even dare to speak loudly. But now, he was being insulted in public by a young lad. How could he tolerate this? The scene was dead silent. Everyone's eyes were focused on Mu Shuijing, and they did not know what he would do next. Lad, what did you say? Mu Shuijing suddenly turned around and stared at Nietian with eyes that were almost spitting fire. Nietian's reaction was very calm. He smiled faintly and said, I said that your title as the #1 formation grandmaster is undeserved. Why don't you change your name to the #1 bullshit grandmaster? His calm voice fell in everyone's ears, and everyone was completely stunned. They were shocked and speechless for a long time. Little bastard, you're courting death. At that moment, a black-robed figure appeared behind Mu Shuijing. With a fierce roar, a streak of terrifying black light shot towards Nietian like a ghost. Boom! In an instant, the void shook violently, as if the space was about to be torn apart. The person who attacked was obviously a Sage-to-be expert. He used all his strength in this attack and wanted to kill Nietian directly. This sudden scene caused everyone to be shocked, and their eyes trembled violently. Stay your hand. Yen Lingyun reacted immediately and shouted. Then, sword aura surged around him, and he wanted to attack. On the other side, Huangfu Changxing's figure also moved. Ghost King's eyes darkened, and he also wanted to attack. However, the three of them were a step too slow. Boom! Before the sharp black light landed, a faint halo appeared around Nietian's body like a shield and enveloped him. Pump! In the next instant, the black light descended, but it was blocked by the halo barrier and directly shattered. The black-robed figure's eyes turned cold. He then looked at a figure not far away from Nietian. It was the Corpse King. The person who blocked the fatal blow for Nietian was the Corpse Lord. At this moment, Mu Shuijing's expression was also extremely gloomy, so gloomy that it seemed as though blood was about to drip from it. In that instant, he realized that there were actually 4 people who wanted to protect Nietian. Moreover, these 4 people were all very powerful. The Corpse Lord, the Ghost King, Yen Lingyun, and Huangfu Zhangsheng. He had never expected that Nietian, an inconspicuous person, would have so many powerful experts willing to stand up for him. The others were also stunned, looking at Nietian in shock, as if they were looking at a monster. Teacher, the black-robed cultivator did not dare to attack again. He directly retreated to Mu Shuijing's side and looked at Nietian with a face full of unwillingness. Everyone, what is the meaning of this? Mu Shuijing's old face was gloomy and embarrassed as he spoke in a cold tone. He did not expect that so many experts would dare to fall out with him for the sake of a mere Nietian. Master Mu, Nietian's words were a little overboard. I can apologize on his behalf, but if you want to kill him, I will not allow it. The Corpse Lord said in a cold tone. The Ghost King glanced at the Corpse Lord and did not speak. Mu Shuijing's expression became even more gloomy. He thought to himself, could this kid be from the Ghoul 13 Coffins? Then he turned his gaze to Huangfu Zhangsheng and said, Tower Master Huangfu, why are you protecting this kid? Nietian saved my life before. Huangfu Zhangsheng replied calmly, neither servile nor overbearing. She knew that Mu Shuijing's status was very high, and he had the powerful Myriad Domains Guild behind him. However, it was impossible for her to watch others attack Nye Tian without doing anything. What about you? Mu Shuijing turned to look at Yin Lingyun and asked in a cold tone. Master Mu, Nye Tian is Feng Qi's friend? Yin Lingyun nodded slightly, looking a little embarrassed. When Mu Shuijing heard Feng Qi's name, his expression changed slightly, and the look in his eyes became a little strange. At this moment, Feng Qi walked over and said with a faint smile, Master Mu, we are all on the same side. This is just a misunderstanding. Mu Shuijing did not know Feng Qi, but he knew the latter's identity. At this moment, his expression changed again, and he seemed to be a little afraid. Master Mu, for my sake, forget about this matter. Feng Qi chuckled as he spoke in a carefree manner. Let it go. Everyone was stunned, as if they thought they had heard wrongly. Nye Tian had insulted Mu Shuijing in public. How could he let this matter go? Mu Shuijing looked at Feng Qi, then looked at Nye Tian, and the corners of his mouth twitched. Finally, he said, Since young Master Feng has spoken, I will give you face. Everyone was stunned again, and they cried out in shock. They had never imagined that Mu Shuijing would really let it go. If they had not seen this scene with their own eyes, they would definitely not dare to believe it. In the next moment, everyone looked at Feng Qi, unable to conceal the fear in their eyes. Who exactly was Feng Qi? Just a sentence from him could actually make Mu Shuijing stop. This was simply too inconceivable. Nye Tian also had a curious expression, and he was extremely shocked. He knew that Feng Qi's status was extraordinary, but he did not expect it to be to this extent. A person of Mu Shuijing's status actually had to restrain himself in front of Feng Qi. Qin Xiuhan looked at Feng Qi, and the corners of her mouth curled up. She thought to herself, the Feng family is indeed powerful. Even someone like Old Man Mu has to tuck his tail between his legs. The strength of the Feng family was not something these people in the frozen remains could imagine. If not for her fear of the Feng family, Qin Xiuhan would have personally killed Feng Qi long ago. Teacher, are we just going to let this matter go? The man in black was not tactful, and he looked at Nye Tian unwillingly. Shut up. Mu Shuijing growled in a low voice, and Cold reprimanded him. The man in black was stunned for a moment, and his expression turned ugly. He did not dare to say anything more. Mu Shuijing glanced at Nye Tian and said cold, Young man, you are indeed not simple. However, I still do not believe what you said just now. What formation using the primordial meridian and bloodline, forming a formation with one's own body, these are all nonsense. Nye Tian also laughed coldly and said, Master Mu, I also want to give you a piece of advice. In the future, be more humble. Things that you cannot understand do not exist. Humph. Mu Shuijing snorted coldly and no longer paid any attention to Nye Tian. His figure moved, and he prepared to leave. However, at this moment, something strange happened. Hua! A low rumble suddenly came from high up in the sky, and then a huge blood-colored hand appeared. Like a huge curtain, it covered the entire Hanya Valley. Boom! In the next moment, a terrifying pressure came from high up in the sky, and it surged in the air. It was extremely terrifying. Everyone felt the powerful pressure, and their expressions changed, and their eyes revealed a look of horror. Chapter 2645. Death Awaits. The sudden change caused the expressions of the Corpse Lord and the Ghost King to change at the same time. Their expressions were filled with extreme shock. They recognized the giant blood-colored hand in the sky. It was the Ghost Emperor's bloody hand. Ghost Emperor's bloody hand. The Corpse Lord and the Ghost King's voices were not loud, but Nye Tian heard them clearly. He looked at them with a strange expression, wondering how they knew about the Ghost Emperor's bloody hand. It seemed that the Corpse Lord and the Ghost King knew many secrets of the Ghost Emperor's tomb, which made Nye Tian feel very strange. The crowd looked at the Ghost Emperor's bloody hand in the sky with shocked expressions, unable to conceal the fear in their eyes. Everyone could feel an invisible pressure surging in the air, making it hard for them to breathe. Nye Tian looked at the Ghost Emperor's bloody hand, but he did not panic too much. He had seen the Ghost Emperor's bloody hand twice. It seemed that there was nothing strange about the giant blood-colored hand, and it could not cause any harm to the crowd. Boom! However, the Ghost Emperor's bloody hand in the sky suddenly shook, and the pressure in the air suddenly increased, making it difficult for the crowd to breathe. What's going on? Nietion's eyes narrowed slightly, and his expression was strange. Nothing like this happened when he saw the Ghost Emperor's bloody hand before. It seemed that the Ghost Emperor's bloody hand had started to show its power this time. What's going on? At this moment, someone shouted in panic, his face full of fear. Nietion's gaze swept across the crowd, and he saw that many people's faces were flushed red, as if they could not bear the strong pressure in the air. Strange, these people can't bear the pressure in the air. He could not help but feel strange and confused. The pressure in the air was indeed strong, but it was definitely not so strong that it was unbearable. Nietion's strength was definitely the weakest among the crowd, but many of the sages-to-be experts had ugly expressions on their faces, as if they were in great pain. The pressure in the air is a kind of restrictive pressure. The strength of the martial artists is different, so the pressure they feel is also different. The stronger the person, the stronger the pressure. At this time, Little Fat Cat's voice rang out, sounding solemn. Nietion frowned, and immediately came to a realization. Damn it, I can't take it anymore. Right at this moment, someone was unable to endure it anymore. With a roar, his figure soared into the sky. He actually smashed a palm strike toward the crimson hand in the sky. Boom! The shadow of the palm was like a mountain as it blasted out with a loud bang. The powerful palm force blasted out, causing the void to tremble slightly. But strangely, the terrifying palm shadows were devoured by the Ghost Emperor's crimson hand like a clay ox entering the sea. There was no reaction at all. That martial artist let out a startled cry. He was clearly very surprised. The others were also stunned, not knowing what was going on. Boom! Right at this moment, the Ghost Emperor's blood-colored hand suddenly swayed in a strange manner, following which a violent palm shadow appeared and suddenly descended, causing the void to tremble. Bang! In the next instant, the palm descended, and with a muffled sound, the cultivator was directly bombarded into a bloody light. He did not even have time to scream before he died. The strange scene caused everyone to suck in a breath of cold air, and their expressions were extremely shocked. That was a half-sane expert, but he had died just like that. The scene in front of them was too terrifying. Nietion also frowned and thought to himself, "This Ghost Emperor's crimson hand is so strange. It seems like it absorbed the palm force of the cultivator and killed him." After all, that person was a half-sane expert. He was one of the top experts in the entire frozen ruins. Now that he had died just like that, it was really a pity. Everyone was stunned by the scene in front of them, and they could not react for a long time. "This is too scary. I have to get out of here." At this moment, another person screamed, and his figure moved as he directly dashed out of the valley. However, his figure had only moved a few hundred meters when he was stopped by an invisible force, and he could not move at all. Everyone looked at that person, and the fear on their faces became even more intense. This is a gigantic restrictive formation. The entire valley is enveloped by an invisible restrictive formation. If we do not break the formation, no one will be able to leave this place. At that moment, Mu Shuijing spoke up. His voice was deep and his face was extremely gloomy. "Master Mu, what should we do?" When everyone heard Mu Shuijing's words, they all looked at him with excited faces, hoping that he had a way to break the formation. After all, Mu Shuijing was known as the #1 formation master in the frozen ruins. He should have a way to break the formation. "Don't panic, everyone. Give I some time and let I find the formation core." Mu Shuijing was very calm and said to the crowd in a deep voice, all right. Listen to Mr. Shuijing, don't panic." The crowd nodded their heads and looked at Mu Shuijing with reverence, as if they were worshipping him. Mu Shuijing smiled faintly, obviously enjoying the reverence from the crowd. Nietion frowned and secretly asked Fat Cat, "Fat, is this really a formation?" "It is, but it is not a simple formation. It is fused with a special barrier. Fat Cat smiled faintly and said, I would like to see how powerful this so-called number one formation is. Yet Tian frowned and said no more. It was obvious that Fat Cat wanted to see Mu Shuijing make a fool of himself. Next, Mu Shuijing began to sense the entire formation bit by bit, trying to find the formation core. At the same time, Fat Cat was also secretly looking for the formation core. I found the formation core. After a while, Fat Cat let out a long breath of turbid air, and with a proud look, he crossed his arms in front of his chest, not intending to reveal the location of the formation core. Of course, Nie Tian was not in a hurry, and waited for Mu Shuijing to find the formation core. Mu Shuijing searched very seriously and very slowly. As time ticked by, everyone could feel that the pressure in the space was slowly increasing. It was about to reach an unbearable point. Mr. Shuijing, have you found the formation core? At this time, someone could not hold it in any longer and asked anxiously. Mu Shuijing ignored those people and focused all his attention on the formation. I found it, After a while, Mu Shuijing let out a long breath of turbid air, wiped the sweat on his forehead, and said with some excitement, Where is it? Everyone exclaimed in unison, and it was obvious that they were very anxious. Mu Shuijing did not speak and smiled faintly. 2 balls of light surged out from his palms and landed in 2 spots in the space. He said, These are the formation cores of the formation. Great! Let me break this formation. Someone shouted in surprise and stepped forward, about to take action. Wait! But Mu Shuijing stepped forward and said, The 2 formation cores must be destroyed at the same time. I'll do it. Another person stepped forward, and it was actually a familiar figure, the 100 Rivers Divine Sex Elder, Zhu Dajiang. Fat, are these the 2 formation cores? Nie Tian frowned and asked Fat Cat. Humph. Fat Cat laughed cold and said, What number 1 master, what bullshit. Such a simple formation was actually fooled by 2 fake formation cores. Fake formation cores? Nie Tian was stunned, and his brows knitted tightly. These 2 fellows who are breaking the formation will definitely die if they attack. Fat Cat laughed cold and said in a deep voice, Stop. When Nie Tian heard Fat Cat's words, he hurriedly growled and stopped the 2 from attacking. Unfortunately, he was still 1 step too late. Boom! Boom! Chapter 2646. 2646. Take you as my master. Zhu Dajiang and the other cultivator attacked at the same time, aiming their attacks at the 2 fake formation eyes. Everyone's gaze flickered at the same time as they were filled with excitement. Bang! Bang! 2 palm shadows sprang out like raging dragons, resulting in a ferocious aura that shook the heavens and earth, causing the surrounding space to vibrate slightly. Zhu Dajiang and the other cultivator were half-martial Sacred Realm experts after all. Even though they were under great pressure, they were still able to unleash their full strength. Bang! Bang! The 2 palm shadows landed at the same time, resulting in a dull thud in the air. At that instant, 2 terrifying vortexes appeared in the air, devouring the 2 palm shadows. Gasp! The crowd was stunned by the scene before them, who took deep breaths. Their eyes trembled violently, while the terror in their hearts was written all over their faces. The crowd initially thought that Zhu Dajiang and the other cultivator would be able to break through the formation, but they did not expect it to turn out like this. Zhu Dajiang and the other cultivator were startled, not knowing what was going on. They both turned around at the same time, trying to ask Mu Shuijing what was going on. Whoosh! Whoosh! But at this moment, the 2 terrifying whirlpools trembled and 2 blood-red blades appeared. The aura of the blades wasn't strong, but they were extremely sharp, fast to the extreme, and incomparably austere. Puff! Puff! Zhu Dajiang and the other cultivator were startled. They tried to resist, but it was too late. The blades pierced through their bodies. A bloody hole appeared on their chests, which was the fatal spot on their hearts. Fresh blood burst out from their wounds, resulting in a horrifying scene. Mumu, Zhu Dajiang turned around and looked at Mu Shuijing. He reached out his arm, as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. His figure fell to the ground. The two of them swayed on the ground, and then there was no more movement. The other cultivators suffered the same fate as Zhu Dajiang, dying a horrible death on the spot. The horrifying scene caused everyone to be stunned on the spot, unable to speak for a long time. What's going on? After a moment, Mu Shuijing reacted and spoke in astonishment. He was similarly extremely shocked. He had clearly sensed that those were the locations of the two formation cores. But why had Zhu Dajiang and his companion died tragically in front of him? At this moment, the others also came to their senses, and their gazes gathered onto Mu Shuijing. However, the admiration they had for Mu Shuijing was no longer there, and it was replaced with doubt and doubt. What's going on? Could it be that the formation that Master Mu mentioned isn't the real one? It's definitely not the array core. Otherwise, how could something like this happen? Two half-sane experts died just like that. What a pity. The crowd discussed the matter. Although they did not directly reprimand Mu Shuijing, there was no longer any respect in their tone. Impossible. This is absolutely impossible. Mu Shuijing seemed to have woken up from a dream. He was in an abnormal state, shaking his head continuously, clearly unwilling to accept the scene before him. At this moment, the black-clad cultivator, Mu Shuijing's disciple, Liang Su, stepped forward and asked, "Teacher, are these two people too weak to destroy the formation core?" Mu Shuijing's eyes trembled slightly, and he nodded repeatedly, saying, "That must be the case. These two people are only half-saints. They are too weak to destroy the formation core at all." Then he swept his gaze across the crowd and said, "Everyone, don't panic. Please believe in I's judgment. Who is the strongest? Please make another move and destroy the formation core." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone involuntarily stepped back. Zhu Dajiang and his companion had died in front of them. Who would dare to make a move? "Lingyun, if you make a move, you can definitely destroy the formation core." Mu Shuijing could only turn his gaze towards Yin Lingyun when he saw that everyone was retreating. He spoke almost pleadingly. Yin Lingyun frowned, thought for a moment, and stepped forward, ready to make a move. He and Mu Shuijing knew each other and could be considered to be on friendly terms. Under such circumstances, since Mu Shuijing had spoken, he really could not refuse. Then, Mu Shuijing looked at the others. He still needed another expert to make a move. "I'll do it." At this moment, a voice was heard. Someone actually took the initiative to step forward. Selfless Sword Demon. Everyone was stunned. When they saw the person's face clearly, they could not help but exclaim. The person who took the initiative to step forward was none other than the Selfless Sword Demon, Qin Xiuhan. Very good. If the Sword Sage and the Sword Demon attack together, they can definitely destroy the formation core. Mu Shuijing looked at Qin Xiuhan, his face full of joy, and said excitedly, "Yin Lingyun and Qin Xiuhan were the true peak experts of the sword world." The two of them joining forces was definitely a very rare sight. Everyone's eyes were bright, obviously looking forward to it. Wait, but at this moment, a voice sounded, saying, "Lord Sword Sage, you can't make a move." Yin Lingyun was stunned for a moment, then turned to look at the figure. It was Nietian, and he asked why. "Because these two places are not the formation core." Nietian took a step forward and said with a firm look in his eyes. Yin Lingyun was stunned again and looked at Nietian with a face full of doubt. Obviously, he did not believe it. "Kid, what nonsense are you talking about? Can the formation core that I have determined be wrong?" Mu Shuijing's face darkened, and his eyes looking at Nietian were incomparably cold, surging with unconcealable killing intent. "Whether it's wrong or not, you will know once you see for yourself." Nie Tianling laughed, then waved his hand, and two streams of sword will gushed out, floating in the void, and said in a clear voice, "Master Mu, look carefully. These two places are the real formation core." Everyone's expression changed at the same time, and their gazes looking at Nietian were very strange, with doubts, surprise, but most of them were disdain. No one had expected that Nietian would stand out at this moment, and once again doubt Mu Shuijing. Kid, you know nothing about formations. On what basis do you doubt I? Mu Shuijing's old face was so gloomy that it was almost dripping with water, and he bellowed angrily. Mu Shuijing, look carefully. Are the two places I pointed out the formation core? Nie Tian frowned and called Mu Shuijing by his name, saying, If I'm wrong, you can deal with me as you please. Mu Shuijing's eyes narrowed, and a burning look flashed in his eyes as he said, Kid, you said it. I said it. Nie Tian smiled indifferently, looking calm. All right. Mu Shuijing's eyes turned cold, and he said coldly, I want to see if the two places you pointed out are the formation cores. If you're right, I is willing to acknowledge you as my master. When everyone heard Mu Shuijing's words, their eyes trembled violently, and they were extremely shocked. Mu Shuijing's words were too ruthless. If Nie Tian was right, there would be a good show to watch. You want to acknowledge me as your master, but I still have to consider if I should accept you. Nie Tian smiled indifferently, looking indifferent. He had absolute confidence in Fat Cat's attainments and formations. Mu Shuijing's words were too arrogant. Mu Shuijing glared at Nie Tian fiercely and did not say anything else and began to sense the formation again. After a while, his old face became more and more gloomy and more embarrassed. Chapter 26:47. Chapter 26:47. Chapter 26:47. Who was it? When the crowd saw Mu Shuijing's ugly expression, they couldn't help but discuss in low voices. What's wrong with Master Mu? Why is his face so ugly? Could it be that the kid was right? Could it be that the two places he pointed out were really the array cores? That can't be. That kid isn't even a divine array master. How could he tell where the array cores are? The discussions of the crowd entered Mu Shuijing's ears, and his expression turned even uglier. He really wished that there was a crack in the ground in front of him that he could hide in. Master Mu, oh Master Mu, you've really screwed up this time. You won't be able to escape today's apprenticeship ceremony. Feng Qi was watching from his side. How could he not tell what was going on? He was gloating in his heart. He knew that Nie Tian didn't know what array formations were. It must have been that seven-tailed Garfield who told Nie Tian where the array cores were. Feng Qi had seen the Fat Cat's capabilities with his own eyes. It was not just any ordinary kind of terrifying. Fat Cat could even easily see through the secrets of the Ghost Emperor's tomb. How could he not see through the array before him? At this moment, Mu Shuijing let out a strange cry. His body swayed, and he took a few steps back, almost falling. Master, what's wrong? Liang Su stepped forward and supported Mu Shuijing. He asked in surprise. He had vaguely guessed something, but he couldn't be sure. Mu Shuijing managed to stabilize his body, but there was a lump of stuffy air in his chest that he couldn't swallow or spit out. He never expected that Nie Tian, who he looked down on, would really point out the location of the array cores. Most importantly, he had just said something decisive. If Nie Tian was right, he would willingly acknowledge Nie Tian as his master. Since he had already said it, it was impossible to take it back. It was obviously too late to regret it now. Master Mu, how is it? At this moment, Nie Tian's voice sounded. He said proudly, Can I acknowledge you as my master now? Pooh! When Mu Shuijing heard Nie Tian's words, his body trembled and he spat out a mouthful of blood. At this moment, he wanted to slap himself a few times. Why do you have to say something like that? Master Mu, it's fine if you don't want to acknowledge me as your master. I can treat your words just now as farts. Following that, Nie Tian's voice sounded once again provocative. Everyone stared at Mu Shuijing with strange gazes. At this moment, even a fool could tell what was going on. Obviously, Nie Tian was right. At this moment, it all depended on whether Mu Shuijing would acknowledge him as his master. Teacher, could it be that that brat is right? Liang Su was stunned and said with an embarrassed expression, Shut up. Suddenly, Mu Shuijing growled and berated, What brat? He's your grandmaster. As the roar ended, Mu Shuijing suddenly turned around and looked at Nie Tian. He took a step forward and knelt down, saying respectfully, Teacher, please accept 3 bows from your disciple, Mu Shuijing. Bang, bang, bang. As Mu Shuijing spoke, he kowtowed with a loud clang. Everyone was stunned by the scene in front of them, unable to believe it. The number one array master, Mu Shuijing, had actually acknowledged Nie Tian as his master. If they had not seen this scene with their own eyes, they would never have believed it. The corpse lord, Ghost King, Yin Lingyun, Qin Xiuhan, and the other experts froze, completely petrified. The ceremony of acknowledging a master is already done. It seems like I have no choice but to accept this disciple. Nie Tian smiled faintly, but looked very reluctant, as if he had suffered a great loss. Feng Qi looked at Nie Tian and could not help but twitch his mouth, thinking, acting cool to this extent, I'm convinced. All right, get up. Following that, Nie Tian waved his hand slightly, signaling Mu Shuijing to get up. In the world of martial arts, the relationship between master and disciple was the most important. As the saying went, a teacher for a day, a teacher for life. If Mu Shuijing knelt to Nie Tian today, he would be Nie Tian's disciple for the rest of his life. However, he still could not understand how Nie Tian had identified the location of the array core. The array before him was very advanced, and the array core was hidden very well. Otherwise, he would not have found the wrong place. Nie Tian was clearly not even a divine array master. How could he have found the location of the array core so easily? What he did not know was that he had not lost to Nie Tian, but to a nine-tailed chinchilla. Master, let's destroy the array core now. Mu Shuijing stood up, looking very embarrassed. However, in front of Nie Tian, he was still very respectful. Before Nie Tian could speak, Yin Lingyun and Qin Xiuhan nodded and prepared to destroy the two array cores. It's useless. However, at this moment, Nie Tian laughed and said, even if we destroy the array core, we won't be able to walk out of this valley. Why? Mu Shuijing was taken aback as he looked at Nie Tian in shock. This array is one with a boundary in this space. Even if we destroy the array core, it will be useless as long as the boundary is not broken, Nie Tian said solemnly, his eyes turning strange. Mu Shuijing's eyes narrowed and his expression turned ugly. Actually, when he was sensing the array earlier, he had also sensed the aura of a boundary. However, he did not dare to confirm how strong the boundary was. Now that he heard Nie Tian say it, the boundary was far stronger than the array. Therefore, even if they destroyed the array core, it would be useless if they could not break the boundary. Master, what should we do? Mu Shuijing looked at Nie Tian with an even more respectful attitude. The gazes of the others were also on Nie Tian at this moment. However, they were no longer contemptuous, but filled with anticipation. Do you still remember what I said earlier? Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, it is impossible for us to break the boundary. Our only chance is to enter the Ghost Emperor's heart and destroy it. The Ghost Emperor's heart was the core of the entire Ghost Emperor's forgotten tomb. As long as it was destroyed, the entire array of the Ghost Emperor's forgotten tomb would be destroyed, and the Ghost Emperor would not be able to revive. Mu Shuijing's expression changed when he heard Nie Tian's words. He asked, Master, is what you just said true? Are you still doubting me? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he looked coldly at Mu Shuijing and asked, I wouldn't dare. Mu Shuijing felt that Nie Tian's eyes were like ice, making him feel a bone-chilling coldness. He could not help but nod slightly and speak respectfully. He was very surprised. How could such a young warrior have such a strong temperament? He did not know that Nie Tian had lived 2 lives and experienced things that even those old monsters who had lived for hundreds of thousands of years might not be able to compare to. What about the rest of you? Nie Tian smiled faintly, then glanced at the crowd and said directly, Are you willing to wait for death here, or are you willing to enter the Ghost Emperor's heart with me? The crowd was stunned at first, then fell into silence. Although Nie Tian had now become Mu Shuijing's master, in the eyes of the majority, it was more like a joke and could not be taken seriously. Therefore, in their eyes, Nie Tian's words were still not credible. I am willing to follow Mr. Nie Tian and enter the Ghost Emperor's heart. At this moment, a figure stood out. It was none other than the master of the Ice Tower, Huangfu Zhangsheng. I am willing to. Then, a second voice was heard. It was Yin Ling Yun. I am willing to. Then, the Corpse King's voice was heard, saying indifferently. Nye Tian frowned and looked at the Corpse King in confusion. He felt very strange. After entering the Ghost Emperor's forgotten tomb, the Corpse King had been helping Nye Tian. This was something that Nye Tian could not understand. Moreover, before Nye Tian entered the Ghost Emperor's forgotten tomb, the Corpse King had tried to stop him.